Beyond Antarctica I. Prologue. There are places on the world map that seem like blank spaces, empty spaces between coordinate lines, frozen regions with no story. Antarctica is, for most people, one of those places, a land of eternal cold, endless storms, and absolute silence. But the truth is that silence does not mean the absence of life. Sometimes it just means that no one has listened closely enough. Throughout history, there have been rumors, strange reports, testimonies lost in dusty archives. Explorers who claim to have seen inexplicable lights under the ice, satellite photos with impossible shadows, old maps in which the edges of the continent did not end with water, but with unknown areas. All of this has been attributed to hallucinations, instrument errors, or simply imagination. Until the night Dave dreamed, it was not an ordinary dream, but an image so clear that he felt the sharp cold in his lungs and the sound of ice cracking under his feet. Ahead, beyond a huge wall of ice, stretched a green valley, bathed in the light of three suns. He knew, without being told, that this place did not exist on any map, and yet, it was real. Thousands of kilometers away, in the same city, and dreamed of something else. A huge piece of ice, crossed by a crystalline tunnel. At its end, the air was warm, fragrant, and the sky had colors they had never seen before. And in the morning, when they shared their dreams, they understood that they were not simple coincidences. The fragments completed each other perfectly, like two pieces of the same puzzle. And deep down, they both felt the same thing, that someone or something had called them. What they did not yet know was that the path they were about to take was not just a geographical expedition, but a passage between worlds, a journey that would forever change their perception of what Earth and humanity mean. Because beyond Antarctica, there is a world that no one talks about, a world that has chosen to remain hidden. And which, perhaps, will not have this choice for a long time. Chapter 1. The night that changes everything. The New York winter seemed to have entered into a kind of pact with time. The days passed, but the cold didn't go away. The snow, mixed with dirty ice, remained stubbornly on the edge of the sidewalks, and the air bit people's cheeks. It was almost midnight, and Dave was still working on his laptop, in a small but elegant apartment in an old building in Manhattan and the corner of the living room. On a wooden shelf in the dark, a series of miniature robot prototypes stared at him like sleeping soldiers. Was working on an environment recognition algorithm for an internal project at the company where he and Anne, his fiancée, spent their days. Both were artificial intelligence specialists, but each had his own style, and was creative and visionary. Dave, methodical and obsessed with details. That evening, Dave couldn't concentrate. Fatigue weighed down his eyelids, and each line of code began to blend with the shadows in the room. He closed his laptop, turned off the light, and leaned back in his armchair, thinking that maybe a short nap would clear his mind. He fell asleep without realizing it, and suddenly, he was no longer in his Manhattan apartment. He was on a vast field of white ice, but the cold didn't touch him. Everything was bathed in a strange light, neither warm nor cold. Cold, coming from a strange sky. It was not blue, but a pale gray, sprinkled with green streaks, and the distance. A thin line of light pulsed, like a giant breath.It seemed as if an invisible force was calling him towards that light. As he walked, the ice underfoot began to change. He cracked into perfectly symmetrical geometric shapes, as if there was a hidden architecture beneath it. Then suddenly, the ground tilted and Dave found himself descending through a huge corridor, carved directly into the ice, with translucent walls through which lines of blue light flowed. The air smelled of clean water, but also of something floral, unknown. When he emerged from the tunnel, the view took his breath away. Before him stretched a world that no atlas had ever mentioned. The sky was bathed in the light of three small suns, slowly dancing around one another. The forests were made up of translucent trees, whose leaves they sparkled and made sounds like a melody when touched by the wind. Golden rivers wound between hills of white stone, and creatures with long wings like ribbons flew along the banks. But he was not alone.At the edge of a forest, several figures watched him. Tall, thin, with gentle features and huge, shining eyes, they wore clothes that seemed woven from light itself. They didn't seem threatening, but their gazes were penetrating, as if they wanted to read his soul. One of them stepped forward and extended his hand. Dave felt a wave of warmth and, at the same time, a message that wasn't spoken in words, but appeared directly in his mind. Not yet, but soon. The light grew, the image dissolved, and Dave woke up suddenly, his heart pounding. The clock read 3:17 in the morning. The air in the room was cold, but not so cold that it explained why he was breathing steam. He tried to get up, but his legs felt shaky. Everything had been so real that, for a few seconds, he didn't know if he was really in the apartment. He got up, turned on the light, and took a notebook from his desk. He began to write down everything he remembered: the color of the sky, the shape of the tunnel, the noise, the leaves, even the sensation of a message sent directly to his mind. The words "not yet, but soon" followed him like an echo. He poured himself a glass of water, but before he could put it to his mouth he realized that his palms were slightly damp, as if he had really touched the ice walls in his dream. He told himself that it was impossible, only his imagination. And yet, the sensation did not go away. He lay down in bed, trying to fall asleep again, but his mind was on alert. He began to make connections. Antarctica was the only place on Earth where such landscapes of infinite ice and natural tunnels could exist. But no one had ever reported another world beyond it. And yet, in his dream, it seemed to exist, and that it was waiting for him. The morning found him tired, with deep circles under his eyes, but determined, and was waiting for him in the kitchen, making coffee. Dave knew that what he had to tell her sounded crazy, but something in his gut told him he had to share everything with her. "And I have to tell you what I dreamed last night." She looked up from her cup, curious. "What exactly?" "I was somewhere beyond Antarctica. I saw an ice tunnel, and after it, a completely different world. 3 suns, singing forests, beings. I don't know how to describe them. It was so real that I could still feel the smell, the touch of the ice. And someone, or something, said to me, 'Not yet, but soon,' and looked at him without blinking. She wasn't skeptical, but she wasn't smiling either. Then slowly she said, 'Dave, I had a dream last night too.'" His heart stopped for a second. "What did you dream?" "An ice tunnel. Huge. But I didn't see the world beyond. Only the entrance. It was under a huge piece of ice cap, hidden. I knew in my dream that it was a gate." The silence that followed was not an awkward one, but one filled with a silent understanding. It was impossible for it to be a simple coincidence. Two people, on the same night, dreaming of two fragments of the same place. And both had the clear feeling that that place really existed. While drinking their coffee, they stopped talking about the usual plans of the day. In their minds, an idea took root. They had to find out if that tunnel and that world were real. And if they were, how to get there. Dave clearly remembered every detail of the path through the ice, and remembered the visual coordinates of the entrance. Together, they seemed to have an incomplete but authentic map. And neither of them was going to let it go unused. That morning, without realizing it, they had taken the first step towards the most dangerous and fascinating adventure of their lives. Chapter 2: The Ice Tunnel. Morning had fallen over Manhattan with a milky light, filtered by thick clouds. The noise of the city still seemed asleep, and Dave and Anne's apartment was a small refuge of peace. The steam of coffee rose in thin spirals above the table, mixing with the smell of toast. Dave still felt that the reality around him was only a thin layer, and underneath was the world he had seen a few hours before, and sat in the chair, her hair tied in a loose bun, wearing one of the thick sweaters she always wore on cold days. Her green eyes had an attentive, almost analytical expression, but in their corners there was a trace of agitation. "Dave, what you told me about your dream. I can't believe it's a coincidence. Because I dreamed something too." He leaned forward slightly, as if he was about to confide in her a centuries-old secret. "I was in a completely white, endless landscape. The wind was blowing, but I wasn't cold. I just felt a pull, as if something from deep within the earth was calling me." Dave held his breath. "I was walking through snow and ice, and at some point, the ground began to give way under my steps. I woke up in front of a huge piece of ice, like a frozen cathedral. And in it, there was an opening. It wasn't a simple crack, but a perfectly rounded arch, worked with inhuman precision." Her eyes narrowed, searching for words. The walls were translucent and lines of bluish light ran through them, like veins. I approached. I wanted to enter, but I felt that it was not the time. And then I heard a sound, not like a voice, more like an echo in my mind. "Wait." Dave felt a shiver run down his spine. In his dream, that being had told him not yet, but soon. It was impossible not to see the connection. "And, in my dream, I passed through that tunnel. And I saw what was beyond." She remained staring at him, silent for a few seconds. "Then, it means you saw what was coming for me." Dave felt that their reality had just changed. These dreams were not simple products of the subconscious. They were, somehow, coordinates sent directly to their minds. And the fact that each had only had part of the image seemed like a clear invitation to unite them. And got up and went to the desk by the window. She took out a black-covered notebook from the drawer, which she used for sketches and project concepts. She began to draw with a fine pencil the outline of the entrance in the dream. The curved lines, the structure of the walls, the reflections of the light. Her hand moved confidently, as if she had copied something she had seen 1,000 times. Dave approached and was amazed. It looked exactly like this in my dream, only I saw the other side. She looked up at him. Do you realize what this means? If the place really exists, we have a map. As they spoke in the background, a car horn echoed in the street, and the usual sounds of the city seemed so banal compared to their discussion. It was as if two worlds coexisted. One, predictable and full of rules, the other, mysterious and unknown. And remembered something and added, in the dream, before I reached the gate, I passed by some kind of black stone, almost covered in ice. It seemed technological. It was not a natural rock, but something built. I saw something similar too, Dave said quietly. It was on the other side, next to a river of gold. The silence that followed was dense. They realized that these details could not be the result of chance. After breakfast, they retreated to the work area of the apartment, a corner filled with monitors, motherboards, cables and prototyping tools. Dave and And were the kind of people who could move from a conversation about movies to a complex technical schematic without any effort. But now, their attention was total. They began searching high-resolution satellite maps of Antarctica, focusing on areas where topographic anomalies looked suspicious, and clearly remembered the orientation of the entrance in the dream. The light came from a certain angle, which indicated the position of the sun. Using this information and NASA images, they narrowed the search to a few isolated, difficult-to-reach regions. As she analyzed the data, and said aloud low, "You know what's the strangest thing? The feeling in the dream, it wasn't just curiosity. It was a kind of calling. Like, we were both invited." Dave nodded. Exactly. And I don't think it's a coincidence that we're working with artificial intelligence. Maybe whatever called us knows how to touch our minds. It wasn't a theory they could tell anyone else without being considered crazy. But between the two of them, it seemed logical. By lunchtime, their apartment was littered with sheets of sketches, satellite prints, rough coordinates, and hasty notes. And the center of the table, Anne's drawing of the ice gate, stood like a visual beacon, constantly reminding them of what they were looking for. And ran a hand through her hair and said, "If we're going to find this, we need to have a real plan. You know very well that Antarctica is not a place you can go as a tourist. You need permits, equipment, logistics, and an official justification." Dave smiled slightly. "We already have a perfect cover, a project to test an exploration robot in extreme conditions. If we present this to the company, they could support us." Anne's eyes lit up. "And the robot? We can build it exactly the way we want. Temperature sensors, structure analysis, underground tunnel detection." The words hung in the air. It was clear, what had started as an exchange of dreams was turning into a real project, with goals and stages. However, Anne had one more thought, one she hadn't said yet. She got up, went to the window and looked out at the fog-covered city. "Dave, if we find the tunnel, if we go beyond, how will we get back?" He looked at her in silence. He didn't have an answer. In the dream, he had felt no barrier to returning, but reality could be different. However, something inside him told him that the way back existed. It's just that not everyone can find it. "We'll take care of it," he said finally. "But first, we have to get there." And turned to him, her gaze mingled with fear and courage. "Then, let's begin." And so, on the same day they had shared their dreams, preparations for an expedition that no one would suspect had already begun. Deep down, they both knew that the ice gate was not just a geographical objective, but also a boundary between what they knew about the world and what they would find out. And its passage could change them forever. Chapter 3. The Unseen Puzzle. After breakfast and the intense discussion of the previous morning, Dave and Anne had spent the entire day analyzing what they remembered from their dreams. It wasn't the first time they had worked together on a complicated problem. But this time they had no clear algorithms or formulas, only images from a world that, officially, didn't exist. Their apartment had been transformed into a makeshift laboratory. On the large dining room table, sketches of the ice gate sat alongside hasty notes, and on the screens of 2 laptops, satellite maps, 3D models, and filtered image files ran simultaneously. Dave was bent over his notebook, drawing the outline of the tunnel he had seen in his dream and parallel, and was drawing from memory the entrance to her dreamed.It first. The 2 sketches seemed similar, but not identical. The differences were subtle: a more pronounced curvature, a different shade of light in the walls, a slightly changed angle of the entrance. "Look," and said, placing the 2 sheets side by side. "I think you saw the tunnel from the inside, and I saw it from the outside." Dave looked up. "Exactly what I was thinking. In the dream, after we passed the gate, we reached a bright area. You didn't get there, but you saw the entrance," as they talked, and remembered a detail. "In my dream, to the left of the entrance there was a rock covered in ice. It had a strange shape, almost like a monument. There were some symbols engraved on it that I didn't understand." Dave felt his chest tighten. "And in my dream, it was the same rock. Only it wasn't completely covered in ice anymore. The symbols were clear, and they seemed alive, as if light was shining through them." Silence fell over the room. It was becoming increasingly obvious that they hadn't been dreaming separately, but had each witnessed part of a single experience. Jo confirmed this, and opened her laptop and accessed a 3D modeling application. She entered the dimensions and shapes from her sketch, then let Dave add the details from his dream. When their models overlapped, the image was perfectly coherent. A monumental entrance, carved into the ice, with a long curved tunnel, lit by bluish lines that branched out like the roots of a tree. "Dave," and said in an almost whisper, "if 2 different people dream of complementary parts of the same place, it means that place is real." He looked at her seriously. "Or that someone wants us to discover it." This thought made them pause. Who or what could be sending images into their minds? And, more importantly, why? They decided to take a more logical step. Using the details of the dreams, they estimated the size of the entrance. If the symbols were about 3 meters high, then the gate could be 10 meters high and 8 meters wide. It was large enough to allow a small vehicle or, at least, several people to pass through. And used the approximate coordinates of the sun in her dream to determine its geographical orientation. Then they searched satellite archives for areas of Antarctica where the topography would match the landscape seen in the dreams. After hours of filtering and comparisons, they identified an isolated region, more than 400 kilometers from any known research base. "Here," and said, pointing at the map. "The underground structure detected by the satellite radar resembles a corridor. It's covered by nearly 200 feet of ice." Dave looked at the image. The underground shape wasn't natural. It was almost too symmetrical, like a construction. "This is the place." Their enthusiasm was mixed with unease. Whatever was beyond the tunnel seemed to be carefully hidden. Maybe on purpose. They jotted down all the details, and said, "You know what's weird? In my dream, I wasn't alone. I felt a presence, even if I couldn't see it. And it wasn't threatening." Dave nodded. "I felt it too." It was as if someone was guiding us. As they compared notes, they noticed that they had both heard a mental message, short and cryptic, and had heard, "Wait, Dave, not yet, but soon." Together, the messages formed a clear sentence. "Wait, not yet, but soon." It was a hint that they were following a plan, even if they didn't know whose. 4 in the afternoon. Their apartment was filled with sheets, maps, and technical data. Dave stood up and looked at everything they had worked on. "It looks like a giant puzzle, to which only we have the right pieces." And smiled, but there was a dose of seriousness in her gaze. "Puzzles are made to be solved." They decided to keep it a secret. If they had talked to anyone else, they would have been seen as dreamers or worse, as people who had lost their minds. Besides, if that place hid something valuable, they couldn't risk it being discovered by someone else before they did. "You know what I think," and said, as she gathered her notes into a folder, "I think our dreams aren't just memories, they're instructions." Dave was left thinking. Then we have to follow them. And for the first time since they'd started talking, they both felt like this wasn't just a scientific curiosity. It was a personal mission, one that had been given to them. Attributed, somehow. Late at night, before going to bed, they reviewed the 3D model of the tunnel together. The blue lines on the walls seemed to pulse slightly under the monitor light, as if the image were coming to life. And joked, trying to lighten the mood. Have you noticed that this tunnel looks like a combination of futuristic architecture and a crystal cave? Yes, and I think it's older than any human architecture, Dave answered seriously. Before turning off the light, Dave looked at the map with the possible location one more time. Antarctica seemed far away and hostile, but now he no longer saw it as a white wasteland, but as a portal to the unknown. And, lying in bed, said softly, "Dave, if the dreams continue, if we receive more pieces, we have to be careful. Maybe the next one will show us what is really beyond the tunnel." He took a hand and answered. "And maybe it will also show us why we need to go there." The light went out, but in the darkness of the apartment, their plans were already starting to take shape. The puzzle was no longer just in their minds. It had become a real project, with a clear destination, beyond Antarctica. Chapter 4. The Secret Investigation. The night had passed without dreams, which was almost strange. After the intensity of the last 2 for Dave and Anne, the absence of mysterious images did not mean peace, but rather a void that made them wonder if they had lost contact with the source that had called them. But the lack of dreams also had an advantage. It allowed them to fully concentrate on their work during the day and in the morning. At the makeshift office in the apartment, the atmosphere was that of a clandestine laboratory. Black and white printed maps lined the table, laptops were open with several windows open at once, and satellite photos were already taped to the walls. "We need to start with the raw satellite images," Anne said, flipping through a thick folder of memory sticks. "The most detailed ones come from polar satellites, but we need to run them through our analysis filter." Dave loaded the first files into a special image processing program. A topographic map of Antarctica appeared on the screen, with gray lines and white spots representing areas covered by thick ice. "The goal is clear," he continued. "We're looking for an area with an unnatural geometric shape, something that can't be explained by erosion, glacial currents, or natural phenomena." The task was not easy. Antarctica is vast, and most of the geological data available to the public is limited because much of the continent is still poorly mapped at the micro level. However, Dave and Anne had access to a database of high-resolution images, obtained from a previous project of their company, and opened a file of an area of East Antarctica. The image was a mixture of pure white and bluish shadows. "Look here," she said, zooming in on a portion. "See this straight line? Ice doesn't form perfectly parallel lines like that unless there's something solid and symmetrical underneath it." Dave pulled the chair closer. The line was clear, about 200 meters long. It seemed to mark an area of lower elevation than the rest, like a long, narrow depression. If it's an entrance, it would be huge. But they couldn't rely on images alone. They began comparing the topographic data with geological measurements made by scientific expeditions over the past few decades. Dave downloaded a dataset that showed the thickness of the ice sheet in different regions. "We have something here," he said, pointing to a point on the map. "The ice is only 58 meters thick, much less than in the surrounding areas. And right above that perfectly straight line in the satellite image," and added, "It was too close to a coincidence to confirm." They used radar wave simulation software to reconstruct what might be beneath the ice. Three-dimensional model appeared on the screen. Beneath the white layer, there was a hollow, tubular shape, with a constant diameter and seemingly smooth walls. "It looks exactly like a tunnel," Anne said, with a mixture of amazement and fear. But what surprised them even more was another detail. At one end of the tube, the model showed a massive, almost circular structure, like a gate. It wasn't natural. A geological phenomenon doesn't create such perfect symmetries. "It's exactly what I dreamed," and whispered. "Even the proportions match." Dave stood still. He had started as a puzzle made up of dream fragments, and now they had tangible proof that there was an anomaly in Antarctica that was perfectly compatible with those mental images. If the data is correct, the entrance could be completely covered in winter and partially exposed in summer, he said. Which would explain why no one had consistently reported it. Or, maybe someone wanted it to remain hidden, and added. They spent hours refining the coordinates. Dave used the GPS data from the images to get the exact position. Latitude 77 degrees 45 minutes S. Longitude 125 degrees 12 minutes E. The area was far from any regular expedition route, in a region where extreme winds and temperatures discourage any exploration. "If we're going to get here, we need to have an official mission," Dave said. "We can't just get on a plane and land on the ice." And leaned back in her chair. "The only option is to use the company as covered. We'll say we want to test a polar exploration robot. They both looked to the corner of the room, where a few old prototypes sat forgotten. They weren't prepared for such a mission, but the idea was already starting to take shape. As they took a short break, Dave looked at the map once more. He felt like that point in Antarctica was staring back at them, like a frozen eye. There was something there, and that something seemed to have known they were coming. "What do you think we'll find over there?" he asked, and didn't answer immediately. She sipped her tea, then said, "If it's a dream world, then it's not just a scientific discovery, it's a contact." Dave smiled briefly, but there was seriousness in his eyes. "And contacts change everything." This evening fell over New York. Their apartment seemed less like an ordinary place and more like a base of operations. The satellite data, the maps, and the 3D models weren't just documents, they were maps to the unknown. Before going to bed, Anne checked the coordinates once more and memorized them. She felt that, beyond all the logistical plans, she needed to know them by heart, as if they were a secret incantation. "It's the beginning of the journey," she whispered. Dave heard her and replied, "And there's no turning back." The light went out, and the city continued to live its night, completely unaware that, in a small Manhattan apartment, two people had just found a gateway to another world. Chapter 5. The Birth of Kiro. The morning began with the steady sound of rain beating against the apartment window. New York was caught in a gray atmosphere, but for Dave and this meant a perfect day of indoor work. The maps and data on the ice tunnel were already collected and confirmed. The next step was to build the only companion they could take with them without attracting attention, a robot. This wasn't just any robot, but a machine that had to fulfill several impossible requirements. It would be an explorer, assistant, cartographer, and guard, all in a body small enough not to attract suspicion and tough enough to withstand the unforgiving temperatures of Antarctica. "If we make it look like a dog," and said, "it'll seem less threatening. And even more likable if anyone sees it." Dave looked up from the notebook in which he was sketching out his first ideas. "Not only that. Dogs have good instincts and move well on difficult terrain. If we replicate the movement of a real dog, we will have stability and agility at the same time." They had worked for years in the field of artificial intelligence, but their projects had been limited by the company's requirements. Now, without an approval committee or a fixed budget, they could afford to be inventive. The first step was choosing materials. Dave took out of the closet some lightweight titanium and carbon alloy plates, saved from an experimental project, and prepared a box with miniature servo motors and a set of state-of-the-art lithium polymer batteries. "The total weight must be under 20 kilograms, Dave said. "And the center of gravity must be optimized for rough terrain. That means we'll mount the battery packs lower, closer to the belly," and replied as they worked. The atmosphere in the apartment changed. It was like a makeshift laboratory, filled with the smell of burning plastic from the 3D printer and the sound of electric screwdrivers. The basic structure of the robot was taking shape. 4 articulated legs, each with 3 independent points of movement. The central body was a short cylinder, into which the processing unit and sensory modules would be integrated. "It has to see better than we do," and said, mounting a set of high-resolution stereoscopic cameras. 2 for frontal vision, 2 for side vision, and 1 for 360 degrees mapping. Dave was working on the internal propulsion system, based on an algorithm that adapted the step of each paw according to the consistency of the ground. And it will learn as it goes. If it encounters brittle ice, it will analyze the vibration and look for a safer route. On the desk, a small artificial intelligence module was already connected to the laptop. Lines of code appeared on the screen, growing with each passing hour. Dave was building him a discrete personality, not just a set of commands. "What are we going to name him?" and asked, as she tightened the screws on the leg joints. "He needs something short, friendly, but with a special resonance," Dave said, thinking for a few seconds. "Kiro." "Kiro," and repeated, testing the name. "I like it. It sounds alert, like a word that lurks." As construction progressed, they began installing critical systems: a portable radar module, a temperature sensor accurate to 0.01 degrees C, directional microphones capable of detecting cracks in the ice, and even a telescopic arm integrated into the body for lifting objects or digging in the snow. Night. When they finished the physical assembly, Kiro sat on the table as a black silhouette, with glass eyes and legs ready to move. He didn't look like a simple robot. He was like a statue waiting to be awakened. Dave pressed the activation button. The LEDs in the eyes lit up in a warm shade of orange, and the legs moved slowly, as if testing the world for the first time. "Hello, Kiro," said, with an involuntary smile. Kiro slightly raised his head towards her and made a short sound, almost like a digital bark. "Functional voice recognition," Dave said, checking the monitor. "He already knows how to associate our voices with internal profiles." Over the next few days, their apartment became a training ground. Kiro learned to avoid obstacles, detect hidden objects, and follow predetermined routes. One evening, and intentionally left a bottle on the floor, and Kiro dodged it with pinpoint accuracy. "If he were alive, I'd say he's cautious," she said. Dave added an unplanned feature, companion mode. In this mode, Kiro would make a set of sounds and movements that mimicked the behavior of a curious and protective dog. He wasn't just a fad. A robot that seemed friendly was easier to justify to other people. In parallel, the two worked on the autonomy module. Kiro would have to be able to explore areas where neither Dave nor And could go. The algorithm would allow him to return to his starting point on his own, even in a wideout, using only visual and magnetic cues. Late one night, after hours of testing, Dave was sitting on the couch with his laptop in his arms, and had fallen asleep in the chair. Kiro, in standby mode, was sitting motionless next to her, his orange eyes pulsing slightly. Dave realized then that, without they wanted to create more than just a tool. Kiro wasn't just a means to find the tunnel, he was part of their plan, a silent witness who would be there when their dream became a reality. When they finally uploaded the full version of the software, Kiro easily passed all the tests. He could detect unstable areas, stream live video, make 3D maps in real time, and communicate over an encrypted channel that was impossible to intercept on standard networks. On the last day of training, Dave attached a small container with modular space to his back. There he could put soil samples, ice, or objects discovered beyond the tunnel. "Ready," he said, looking at the robot. "He's ready." And leaned over and gently stroked his metal shell, a gesture that, if he were a real dog, she would have understood immediately. "You will come with us, Kiro. And you will be the first to see what is beyond." In the silence that followed, the sound of rain was heard again in the window. Outside, the world was banal, ordinary, full of routines. But inside, in that room full of maps, cables and tools, something extraordinary had come to life. Kiro did not yet know what path awaited him. But Dave and knew very well. Soon, the robot dog would witness their first encounter with the hidden world beyond Antarctica. Chapter 6. The Covered Plan. The morning began with a faint smell of burnt coffee in the apartment. And had been bent over her laptop for more than 2 hours, and the mug on the desk was smoking above some documents scattered chaotically. Dave, his eyes red from a night of appointments at Kiro, was sitting at the kitchen table, leafing through a stack of printed official forms. "It has to look perfect," and said, without looking up from the screen. "Not just plausible. Perfect. If we get one comma wrong, we won't get funding approved and we won't have access to the area we want to go." Dave nodded, but another problem was on his mind. How to keep the actual coordinates of the tunnel a secret, even from the expedition's logistics team. Normally, any mission to Antarctica had to be approved by the Antarctic Treaty Committee, and every move was tracked by GPS if they had openly stated. The real reason, it would have immediately attracted the attention of governments and corporations, though they had invented a cover story. An expedition to study microfractures in the ice sheet, using an experimental autonomous robot called Kiro, presented as an academic project developed for geological mapping. Research on the structural stability of ice in isolated areas, and read from the document, it sounded banal enough. And it justified the use of Kiro. Dave filled in the equipment section. Reconnaissance drone, temperature sensors, portable mini-lab for testing samples. The list sounded boring, but it was exactly what they wanted to convey. 2 young, enthusiastic, but non-threatening researchers. The biggest problem was transportation. Areas close to the tunnel coordinates were rarely directly accessible. Most expeditions had to join larger logistical missions. "If we join the team at Polaris Station, we could get lost on the road for 2 or 3 days, Dave said. "I know some of their technicians. They might leave us alone if we give them the impression we're taking routine measurements." And looked at him over the edge of the laptop. "And if they realize we're deviating from our route? We need a technical alibi. We can say we've detected a magnetic anomaly and need to check the area." Over the next few days, their apartment became a planning center, and the walls, huge maps of Antarctica, were marked with red dots and dashed line routes. And spent hours checking satellite data, looking for possible cracks or entrances hidden under layers of ice. Dave worked in parallel to adapt Kiro's software for dual coverage. A public mode, which transmitted ice and climate data to the mission servers, and a private, encrypted mode, which sent only the coordinates and images of the tunnel to their laptop. What if someone intercepts the private transmission? And asked. They won't be able to decipher it. I created an algorithm that you won't find even in our laboratories, Dave answered, with a tired but confident smile. In addition to the technical part, the preparation also included the physical aspect of the expedition. They began cold resistance training in a specialized center in Brooklyn, spending hours in temperature-controlled rooms, wearing heavy equipment. Kiro was tested in parallel on artificial ice rinks, learning to keep his balance even on extremely slippery surfaces. One evening, while they were checking the plans once again, and stopped suddenly, holding a list of supplies in her hand. What if the tunnel isn't where we think it is? What if the dream misled us? Dave was silent for a few seconds. Then we'll come back with legitimate scientific data and no one will suspect we were after something else. But I think it's out there, and if it is, we need to be the first to find it. They began buying equipment discreetly, from various sources, so as not to arouse suspicion. Thermal clothing from a mountain shop in Vermont, a portable generator ordered from Canada, freeze-dried supplies from the internet. The most difficult thing to obtain was authorization to transport Kiro to Antarctica. Officially, the robot was classified as research equipment, but its advanced functions raised questions. Dave wrote a meticulous technical report, emphasizing that most of the components were prototypes intended to evaluate resistance to low temperatures, avoiding any mention of complex autonomous capabilities. Few days after they sent the complete documentation, you receive an email from the logistics coordinator of Polaris Station. Your request has been approved. You will be included in the scheduled transport next month. And read the message with a combination of excitement and anxiety. That's it, there's no turning back. Dave smiled, but there was a hint of tension in his eyes. Exactly. Now we just have to get there without arousing suspicion. And the last few days before departure, they scheduled meetings with a few close colleagues, offering the official version of the mission, an opportunity to test our technology in one of the most hostile environments on Earth, and no one suspected the truth. The night before the flight, the apartment was filled with boxes and backpacks. Kiro stood in the middle of the room, his bright eyes twinkling faintly, as if he knew that he was about to leave the safety of the makeshift laboratory for the first time, and sat down next to him, checking the case and the moisture seals one last time. Are you ready, Kiro? She asked, and the robot raised its head and emitted a short sound, almost human in its warmth. Dave closed the laptop and came to her side. We're all ready. That hour in New York, the noise of traffic crept through the tall buildings, but to Dave and the city seemed far away. Their thoughts were already there, at the end of the world, where an ice tunnel could open a gateway to another reality. And everything was hidden under a banal, cold and calculated plan, a plan that, on paper, was nothing more than scientific field research. But in their minds, every detail of this plan was a promise that they would go beyond. Chapter 7. The Road to the Edge of the World. The airport in Punta Arenas, Chile, was bathed in a cold morning light, with a wind that cut through their thick jackets. Dave and And, still wearing their city clothes, stood near a metal platform where staff were loading the last containers onto the C-130 Hercules cargo plane. Kiro was in a special crate, with an internal heating system, secured with orange straps. Dave had personally checked every safety feature before boarding. If the robot had suffered any malfunctions along the way, their mission would have been compromised before it even began. We can still change our minds, and joked, with a weak smile. You know we can't, Dave replied in a low voice. Not after everything we've prepared. The C-130 took off with a deafening roar. Inside, the vibrations were bone-chilling, and the cold air seeped through every crack in the fuselage. The flight to Polaris Station would take more than 8 hours, crossing the Drake Passage and heading toward the white depths of the continent. He one point, and looked out the tiny window of the plane and saw the first ice floes, huge white slabs floating on a metallic gray ocean. There was nothing around but desolation, a landscape that made you feel so small that you almost lost the meaning of your own existence. When they landed on the makeshift runway next to Polaris Station, the wind blew with brutal force. The temperature felt below -30 degrees C, and their breath instantly froze on their masks. The station staff, he greeted them briefly. Helping them unload their equipment, a large man with a white beard and pale blue eyes introduced himself. My name is Harlan. I'm in charge of logistics here. You've arrived on a fine day. Yesterday's blizzard has died down. He led them inside a modular building, where the dry heat hit their skin like an oven. The smell was a mixture of diesel, hot metal, and wet clothes hanging out to dry. During the first day, Dave and Ann had set up their equipment in a small secondary laboratory, as their official documents required. Kiro had been taken out of its crate and allowed to acclimatize to the station's ambient temperature, and then it had been subjected to functional tests. The engines are fine, the sensors are working, Dave confirmed, watching a screen displaying real-time data. The autonomous modes responded without delay. The next morning, they were scheduled to go on their first field test. The official objective, mapping microfractures in an ice field located 12 kilometers from the station. The real objective, to evaluate Kiro's behavior in conditions similar to those they would encounter near the tunnel and the snowmobile ride, and looked out at the endless expanse of pure white, only the sky contrasting with cold shades of blue. Everything seemed still, but Dave knew that beneath this apparent stillness lay a dynamic world. The ice moved slowly, cracks opened and closed, and the weather could turn deadly in a matter of minutes. Arriving at the test site, they unloaded Kiro and turned it on. The robot immediately began scanning the surface with its sensors, moving with surprising grace for a metal mechanism, and watched the data on the tablet connected via encrypted link. It's detecting a temperature variation 15 meters northeast. It's not big, but it's there. Dave looked up at the horizon. It wasn't the tunnel, but it was a clear sign that Kiro could identify subtle thermal anomalies, just what they needed. On their way back, a station technician, a young man named Jared, stopped them in the common room. I saw your route today. You got pretty close to the red zone, and kept her cool. It was a marked point for testing the sensors. Nothing more. Jared didn't seem convinced, but he didn't say anything else. Just a vague smile, half amused, half suspicious. That night, Dave couldn't sleep. In his head, the map of Antarctica overlapped the images of the dream. The tunnel, the strange light, the sensation of passing. They were only a few hundred kilometers from their destination. But each step forward had to be taken carefully, under the curious eyes of those at the station. And, sitting by the narrow window of their room, looked outside and the distance, under the golden light of a moon almost hidden by clouds, the ice field seemed to breathe. And for a moment, he thought he saw a thin, dark line, like a scar, disappearing into the white. Dave, I think I saw something, she whispered. But when they both turned to look, there was nothing. Only the wind sweeping the surface, leaving behind a perfect desert. And yet, in their souls, they knew, the road to the edge of the world had only just begun. Chapter 8. The White Blizzard. The morning in Antarctica was no different from any other day. A milky white sky, the diffuse light reflected by thousands of ice crystals suspended in the air, and a constant wind, like a cold breath of the earth. Dave and Ann woke up early, dressing in thick layers of thermal clothing. The plan was to make a longer trip to the northeast, where, in the satellite data, an area of abnormal temperature appeared under the ice sheet. Officially, in their documents, this was just an area of geological interest for studying subglacial currents. Unofficially, it was one of 3 possible places where the entrance to the dreamed tunnel could be. Kiro, the robot dog, had been checked and powered up. His internal microreactor gave him autonomy for over 2 weeks, but Dave was cautious. Any malfunction here could mean the end of the mission. When they left, the sky seemed stable, but the station meteorologist, a quiet guy named Lawrence, had warned them. There is a low-pressure front 200 kilometers to the west. If it changes direction, it will be bad. It didn't take long for them to understand what bad meant in Antarctica. During the first hours of the snowmobile trip, the wind began to pick up. Horizontal flakes, sharp as ice needles, hit the visor. Kiro, running alongside, seemed unaffected. His sensors were protected by a special casing, and his mechanical legs adapted to the terrain without hesitation. Dave, visibility is dropping rapidly, and shouted into the headset microphone. Just a little longer, I want to reach the marked point. If we stop now, tomorrow might be even worse. The wind turned into a roar, a constant sound, like a huge engine that doesn't stop. Increasingly dense flakes spun madly, and the horizon disappeared completely, replaced by a white curtain that swallowed everything more than a few meters away. Despite the weather, Kiro had detected something. An area with higher heat flux under the ice, exactly where Dave had hoped. The robot emitted a short beep, then stopped, fixing its gaze of sensors on a point in the distance. It reads +2 degrees Celsius at 15 meters deep, and confirmed, checking the data on the portable screen. We write down the coordinates and turn back. But the return was no longer simple. In the blizzard, the tracks disappeared in a few seconds, and the portable GPS began to give errors, probably due to atmospheric interference. Dave stopped the snowmobile and approached Kiro, activating autonomous navigation mode. "Lead us to the base," he ordered it curtly. The robot had started, orienting itself according to an internal system of gyroscopes and beacons placed along the way. But at some point, a different sound rang out in their headphones, an alert signal. "What is it?" And asked. "I think it detected movement under the ice layer, but it can't identify the source." Suddenly, a dull noise was heard under their feet, like a huge crack. Dave realized, a crack was forming right under the trail. "Move!" he shouted. Kiro launched himself forward, and the two of them followed him on their snowmobiles, accelerating blindly through the curtain of snow. Behind them, the sound of breaking ice grew louder, like an approaching wave. After a few minutes that seemed like hours, they reached a more stable area. Kiro stopped, sitting down like a real dog, but with his head raised to the wind, listening. The wind was not slowing down, but Dave felt a slight change in direction. The weather front was probably passing over them. They still had miles to go to the station, but the immediate danger had passed. Finally, in the distance, the vague outline of modular buildings appeared through the gusts. Jared, the suspicious technician, was waiting for them outside, holding his hand over his eyes to see better. "You were lucky," he shouted over the wind. The front had moved east by just a few degrees. Otherwise you wouldn't have made it in the lab, after they had thawed their gloves and hung their clothes out to dry, and analyzed Kiro's data. The area of high temperature under the ice was exactly on the hypothetical line drawn on their secret map. It was, without a doubt, a key point. Dave patted Kiro's metal head. "A gesture more for him than for the machine. Without you, we wouldn't have made it today." And looked at him, with a mixture of fatigue and excitement. "We found the first real clue. Now we just have to get there, without freezing to death." Outside the station, the blizzard continued to howl, hiding all traces of the day beneath the pile of ice. But somewhere beneath that white sea, the entrance to another world slept. Chapter 9. The Signal in the Ice. After the blizzard that had almost cost them their lives, Dave and had decided to wait 2 days at Polaris Station to let the weather stabilize and reanalyze their route. In their laboratory, heated to an almost artificial comfort, the data collected by Kiro ran on the central screen. On a 3D graph of the ice sheet, the thermal anomalies already recorded were visible. Several warm areas under the thick layer, but one of them stood out. Not only in intensity, but also in shape. "Look here," and said, approaching the screen. "This area is not a diffuse point. It is a kind of curved line, like an arch. It looks like a structure," Dave added. "And the temperature difference is constant. It's not just a pocket of warm water." Kiro stood a few meters away, connected by an optical cable to the computer, his sensor eyes turned off, as if he were sleeping. Dave was loading him with new sets of algorithms for advanced geothermal analysis. The goal was simple. The robot had to be able to identify patterns of artificial heat or products of unknown energy sources. On the third day after the blizzard, the sky was clear, a rarity in Antarctica. It seemed the perfect time for a new trip. Dave checked every detail: snowmobile fuel, battery packs, supplies and communication systems, and prepared the support drone, in case visibility permitted the flight. The target point was approximately 28 kilometers east of the station, in an area recently unexplored by anyone in Polaris. Officially, their reason was mapping subglacial temperatures for climate studies. In reality, they were heading exactly towards the anomaly Kiro had detected. The road was initially smooth. The snow was compact, and visibility was almost perfect. The sun, low on the horizon even at noon, made the ice crystals shine in shades of blue and gold. Halfway through, Dave stopped the snowmobile and activated Kiro in scout mode. The robot moved forward with rapid steps, sending data in real time. Its sensors were not limited to temperature. They measured infrared radiation, electromagnetic field variations, and even fine ground vibrations. "Dave, did you see this?" And asked suddenly, pointing to the portable monitor. "Yes. The temperature under the ice is increasing by 4 degrees Celsius compared to the surrounding average. That's huge." Kiro stopped and emitted a long beeped, filtered radar image appeared on the screen. Under the ice, at a depth of 22 meters, stretched a perfect oval shape, with smooth, almost symmetrical edges. "This is not natural," Dave said in a serious tone. "And the temperature inside is constant. Just like in my dream," and murmured as they stood there, analyzing the data. A strange phenomenon occurred. In the corner of the screen, Kiro's electromagnetic sensor detected a weak, repetitive pulse. It was not static. It was not ordinary radio interference. It was a signal. "Repeat the scan," Dave ordered. Kiro sent out the radar pulse again and confirmed. The signal was there, at a steady rate, every 11.2 seconds. It was faint enough to be undetectable from the air, but clear to a sensor positioned close to the source. "Who or what could be emitting something like that here?" And asked. "If it's natural, it could be a piezoelectric resonance from the ice. But this shape and the constant temperature make me think otherwise." Dave knelt down next to the robot and checked its position. Kiro seemed to be looking down like a sniffing dog. If he had been alive, it would have been clear that he was sensing something. They decided to move forward another 2 kilometers. To obtain a complete set of measurements, as they got closer, the electromagnetic signal increased slightly in intensity, and the subglacial temperature remained constant at +2 degrees C, impossible to maintain naturally in the middle of a layer of ice tens of meters thick. Having reached the exact coordinates, Kiro stopped on its own. He was now also recording a slight background noise, a low-frequency vibration, like a very distant murmur. "Dave, this is not just a signal, it's almost like a code," said and, following the graphs. "If it's a code, it means someone is transmitting it. And if someone is transmitting it, it means we're not alone." The silence of Antarctica seemed heavier than ever, no sound except the wind and the regular beeps of the equipment. Dave felt a mixture of adrenaline and fear. Either they had just discovered evidence of an artificial structure under the ice, or they were entering a game they didn't understand. As they prepared their equipment for the return, Kiro suddenly raised his head, as if he had received something new. A rapid beep sounded, and an unexpected deviation appeared on the screen. The electromagnetic signal had suddenly increased, as if the source had noticed that it was being monitored. "Dave, I think he answered us," and whispered. A cold shiver, unrelated to the air temperature, ran down their spines. It was the first time they felt that what they were looking for was looking for them too. The return to the station was made in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The data stored in Kiro's memory was going to be analyzed that night. But deep down they both knew the signal in the ice was the beginning of a connection with the dream world, and perhaps with something much older than humanity. Chapter 10. The Hidden Gate. For 3 consecutive nights, Dave and analyzed the data obtained by Kiro in the area of the anomaly. The electromagnetic signal was stable, but the way it pulsed seemed to hide a logical structure. It was not random noise, it was a pattern. And had spent hours running the sequence through a decoding program based on AI algorithms. And at one point she looked up at Dave with an expression that was difficult to define between amazement and anxiety. "Dave, the pattern repeats itself every 3 cycles. It doesn't resemble a human language, but it doesn't resemble a natural phenomenon either. Then it must be a warning signal or some kind of beacon." In parallel, filtered 3D scans showed that the oval shape detected under the ice was just the top of a larger structure, descending into the depths. It was perfectly aligned with the direction of the curve they had initially seen. On the morning of the 4th day, the Antarctic sky was covered with thin clouds, but the wind was light, a rare occasion. They decided it was time to return to the field, this time with light drilling equipment, designed to pierce the ice for sampling. Officially, it was a geological experiment. Unofficially, it was the final step towards discovering the gate. The 28 kilometers to the side of the anomaly passed faster than the first time. Kiro walked ahead, in Pathfinder mode, constantly analyzing the temperature and composition of the ice. With each kilometer, the electromagnetic signal strengthened, like a heartbeat that you could feel more clearly in your chest. Arriving at their destination, the two set up a small work tent, protected with aluminum panels to withstand possible gusts of wind. Dave mounted the drilling probe, and calibrated the sensors to check for any variation in the density of the ice. "If this shape is what we think it is, We should find a cavity about 70 feet deep, and said. And if we find anything deeper? Dave asked with a strained smile. Then we'll be the first people to see it. The drilling began slowly, with a steady metallic noise. After the first 50 feet, the ice became more transparent, with bluish streaks like frozen veins. The local temperature was rising slightly, a phenomenon that would normally be impossible. Kiro, who was standing at the edge of the area, began to emit a repetitive beep. Dave looked at the portable monitor and saw that the robot was detecting a sudden change in the composition of the air beneath the ice. We have gas trapped in the cavity, he said. The pressure is stable, but that confirms that there is empty space down there. As they descended to the 22 meters, the probe occasionally hit something harder than ice, not rock, but something smooth and uniform. Dave stopped drilling, then lowered a microfiber optic camera through the perforation. Something appeared on the screen that made them forget to breathe for a moment. A translucent surface, almost perfectly rounded, with internal blue-green reflections. Like a thin shell of crystal embedded in ice. It's not ice. It's not rock either. It's a material I don't recognize, and whispered. And, you see this? Dave asked, zooming in on the image. In one corner, along the curve, there was a shape resembling a vertical slit, surrounded by small lines that seemed engraved. The original plan was just a document. But the idea of being so close to a possible gate and leaving without trying to touch it was unacceptable to Dave. We can widen the hole and lower a contact probe, he said. We're not going in, we're just touching the material. And though cautious, was equally curious. Using a special drill bit, they widened the hole to 6 inches, enough to send out a telescopic arm with a tactile sensor. As the metal tip touched the surface, Kiro, standing nearby, made a sound he'd never made before. A long modulated tone, like a dog sniffing something familiar at the same time. The electromagnetic signal detected the other day changed its rhythm. From a steady 11.2-second pulse, it went to a rapid sequence, almost like a message. Then, complete silence. What the hell happened? And asked, watching the graphs. I think it felt us, Dave replied. The silence lasted only a few seconds. Then, from deep within, a strong vibration shook their legs. The ice around the perforation began to crack slightly, but not dangerously. It seemed more like something inside was pushing. Kiro approached the edge of the makeshift crater and projected his updated subglacial map onto the snow. The oval cavity had opened slightly, and the crack he had noticed earlier now seemed wider, and looked up at Dave. Dave, the gate opens by itself. What happens in the next few moments is beyond their imagination. Beneath the layer of ice, the translucent surface began to emit a diffuse light, like a miniature aurora. The colors slowly changed, passing from green to turquoise and then to a brilliant white. The vertical slit had widened enough to reveal a narrow corridor that spiraled downward. Warm, humid air rose through the opening, steaming up the camera. It's impossible. The temperature down there is over 20 degrees C, and said, looking at the data. It's not impossible, it's just something else, Dave replied, his voice almost a whisper. They both knew that entering that place was a violation of all protocols. Any discovery beneath the ice cap had to be reported immediately to the authorities. But they also knew that if they did, the secret would be taken by others, studied behind closed doors, and they would never see what lay beyond. If we go in, there's no going back to our old lives, and said. The life before disappeared the moment I saw this, Dave replied. They looked into each other's eyes, a mixture of fear and determination. The decision was made. They would not descend that day yet, but the gate had been found. And more importantly, it had been opened. As the light faded, the slit began to slowly shrink, as if the structure were breathing and closing its eyelids. Within minutes, the translucent surface returned to its original state, and the electromagnetic signal resumed its constant pulse. Dave and now knew exactly where to return. The coordinates were saved in Kiro's memory, and all the images were secured in 2 encrypted servers. On the way back, in the polar silence, and said in a low voice, "Do you know what scares me the most?" "What?" "That the gate didn't open by chance, I think. It was waiting for us." Chapter 11. The Descent. 5 days later, after the polar weather had given them a rare window of calm, Dave and were once again at the edge of the anomaly. They were dressed in special thermal suits, each carrying a backpack with 2 days' worth of supplies and underground exploration equipment. Kiro, in expedition mode, had 2 high-powered headlamps and a real-time 3D scanning system attached to his sides on the way to the discovery site. In the white silence of Antarctica, and said nothing. She kept her gaze straight ahead, but Dave could feel her tension in the way she tightened the straps of her backpack. They were about to do something no human had ever done before, or at least, no one in their world had ever acknowledged it. Once they reached the coordinates, Dave activated the memorized sequence of the contact probe, the same one that had triggered the opening last time. Without delay, the translucent surface began to the dance of colors, passing through green, turquoise, brilliant white. The vertical slit slowly opened, letting out a warm, humid current, charged with a faintly sweet scent, like unknown flowers. "I still can't believe it's real," and whispered. "Neither can I, but it's here. And it's waiting for us," Dave replied, fixing her with a determined look. Kiro went first, spiraling down the smooth ramps with his mechanical legs, checking the stability of the structure. The data from his sensors showed that the walls of the corridor were not pure ice, but a composite, semi-organic material capable of transmitting light through the entire structure. Dave and An stepped after Kiro, their feet sinking slightly into the shiny but firm surface of the ramp. The light in the walls seemed natural, but it didn't come from the sun or any visible source. It was diffuse warm, like the light in a greenhouse. As they descended, the temperatures rose steadily, reaching a surprising comfort. The sound of the wind outside disappeared completely, replaced by a deep, rhythmic murmur, as if the entire structure was breathing somewhere deep down. "Do you realize, Dave? There are no ice crystals here. This structure maintains a constant temperature. It's like it's alive," Anne said, touching the translucent wall with her hand. "Or built by someone who knew exactly what they were doing," he replied. After the first 200 meters, the corridor changed its geometry. The walls were no longer perfectly vertical but wavy, as if they had been sculpted by waves. Inside the translucent material, slow movements of color could be seen, blue pulsations, green flows that slipped under the surface and melted into brilliant white. Kiro detected frequent electromagnetic field fluctuations, but these did not seem dangerous. Rather, they gave the impression of some kind of active network, perhaps a lighting or temperature maintenance system. "Have you noticed that these color pulsations appear exactly after we move?" And asked. "Yes, it seems to be reacting to our presence." After about 30 minutes of descent, the corridor widened into a huge elliptical-shaped room. The walls and ceiling were made of the same translucent materials, but here the light was more intense, and at the bottom of the room a network of channels through which clear water flowed could be seen. Dave knelt down next to one of the channels and touched the liquid. It was warm, almost like thermal water. He tasted a drop. It was sweet, but with a mineral aroma. "This is not ordinary water. It is loaded with something, maybe minerals or nutrients," he said. "Or it's part of the system that maintains life here," and added, on one of the walls, halfway up, engraved shapes appeared, much clearer than what they had seen on the surface. They were curved lines, intersected by circular symbols, and in the middle was a shape resembling a planet surrounded by 3 concentric circles. And took out her portable scanner and recorded the image. "If these are maps or inscriptions, it means that the place is not just a passage, it is a deliberate construction. And someone or something wanted us to see it," Dave added. From the center of the elliptical room began another corridor, narrower, but with much more intense light. The walls now seemed almost transparent, and through them one could see some kind of vegetable or mineral mass, like immense roots that ran through the entire structure. Kiro stopped suddenly, emitting a short tone. Dave checked the screen. The sensors had detected a change in pressure about 300 meters below. It was the clear sign of a massive opening or a huge chamber. "This must be the end," and said with a mixture of excitement and fear. As they moved forward, the feeling of the space changed. The air became richer, almost perfumed, and the light was no longer static, but moved slowly, as if it were dancing on the walls. Dave felt the hair on the back of his neck rise. There was an otherworldly beauty here, but also a latent force, as if they were being watched. Not by cameras or mechanical sensors, but by something conscious. And seemed to feel the same. She turned her gaze to him and whispered, "We are not alone." As they descended the last spirals, the corridor suddenly opened into a platform located on the edge of a huge opening. Below them, dozens of meters away, a green valley could be seen, illuminated by a source that was not the sun, perhaps a luminescent core or a network of natural domes that reflected the light. Moving silhouettes could be seen, too far away to be clearly distinguished, but enough to know that there was life there. Dave and An stood in silence, their hearts beating wildly. Kiro, equally silent, recorded every detail. Beyond Antarctica, Dave whispered, and for the first time, it was not just a dream. Chapter 12. The First Turquoise Sunrise. The cold wind of Antarctica was now just a memory. Dave and Kiro stood on the natural platform, looking down at the green valley that stretched below them like an oasis hidden in the heart of the ice. And yet, nothing they saw could compare to the landscapes of the Earth. The light was not white or yellow, but had a soft, almost liquid shade of turquoise. The enormous walls of translucent ice, through which they had descended, now arched above like a natural dome, letting in rays that seemed filtered through thousands of crystals. Beyond this arch, they could see an opening in the distance, a curved horizon, as if the entire world were hidden in a huge cavern open to another sky. And looked up just as the turquoise light intensified. From that opening emerged, not one, but 3 spheres luminous. The first, the largest, had a pearly white, slightly warm. The second, much smaller, shone in a pale yellow, with green reflections. The third was a pure jewel, a light blue sun, almost aquamarine, which spread soft rays that transformed the air into a living painting. The sky has 3 suns, and whispered, as if she was afraid of ruining the moment. It's not our sky, Dave replied, almost voiceless. It's something else. The 3 spheres lifted their bodies above the horizon, the entire valley filled with impossible colors. The green of the leaves became pure emerald, the rivers reflected silver, and the rocks had shades of purple and gold. The air was thick and sweet, with a constant breeze that carried an unknown floral scent. It seemed richer in oxygen. Each breath was deeper, cleaner, like an infusion of energy into the lungs. Kiro quickly detected the composition of the atmosphere, projecting the data onto Dave's screen. Oxygen level 7% higher than on Earth, high humidity, but the temperature stable at 23 degrees Celsius. It's basically a paradise for life, concluded And, looking at the forests at the bottom of the valley. And for us, if nothing else kills us first, Dave added with a bitter smile. They descended a natural path, paved with shiny stones that seemed polished by water. A few dozen meters away, the forest revealed its true beauty. Translucent trunks, almost like glass, but with a luminous core that pulsated slowly, like a giant heart. The leaves were not uniform green, but iridescent between blue, pale pink and gold, changing hue with the touch of the wind. And then Dave realized, the forest was singing. It was not a sound per se, but a harmonic vibration, a symphony of long, smooth notes that seemed to flow through the air from each leaf. It's as if the entire forest is breathing and singing at the same time, and murmured, visibly overwhelmed. In the heart of the forest flowed a wide river, but it did not have the classic color of water. It was a silvery liquid, fluid like mercury, but without its toxicity. When Dave threw a stone into it, it did not produce splashes, but perfect circles of light that propagated for a long time, like the waves in a crystal bell. Kiro scanned continuously, and the data indicated that the liquid was water, with an unusual concentration of luminescent minerals. Dave and An looked at each other. In that world, everything seemed designed for beauty, but also for functionality. On the shore, they spotted the first creatures. They had a body similar to a large feline, but their skin was covered with a kind of soft scales, which reflected the colors of the light of the 3 suns. Their eyes were vertical, a bright green, and their movements slow and graceful, as in a dance. The specimen approached a few meters, looking directly at Kiro. The robot raised its head slightly and emitted a soft sound, similar to an ultrasonic greeting. The creature tilted its head in an almost curious gesture, then turned and disappeared among the translucent trunks. Are they peaceful? And asked. Or just very sure of them, Dave replied, as the aquamarine sun climbed into the sky. Its rays radically changed the landscape. The forest became completely translucent, revealing the roots that stretched deep into the soil. At the same time, Dave felt a strange sensation. An old pain in his left shoulder, caused by an injury from his youth, seemed to disappear completely, and moved her hands with a new ease. And her gaze lit up. Dave, This light has a biological effect. I feel you are lighter. I don't know if it's the light or just the fact that we left our world behind. From a clearing, the panorama opened up to a vast plain, crossed by perfectly circular lines, like agricultural terraces, but on a gigantic scale. And the distance, they were erecting structures that resembled towers, but they seemed to have grown organically, not built. And stopped a step and looked long. I think we are not the first here. And I think we are not just visitors, Dave said, looking at the horizon with a mixture of fascination and concern. Kiro emitted a short sound, signaling the detection of intelligent life forms a few kilometers away. He was clear. The next step would take them directly into the heart of this hidden civilization. Chapter 13. The Singing Forest. The forest stretched out before them like an ocean of light and unusual shapes. Each tree had a tall, straight trunk, almost transparent, with a core that pulsated slowly, like a giant heart. The light from the three suns refracted through the translucent bark, creating living, ever-changing mosaics on the ground. From a distance, it seemed just an unusual forest. But as they walked between the trunks, Dave and began to perceive a constant murmur, like a barely audible vibration, rising from all directions. Do you realize? Said And, stopping and listening. It's not wind, it's something else. It's like a choir, Dave added. And he was right. When a light wind passed through the leaves, the noise turned into a complex harmony. Each leaf, long and thin like a blade of flexible crystal, vibrated in a precise note. Millions of leaves sang simultaneously, but not chaotically. It seemed like a natural orchestra, directed by the very breath of the forest. Kiro recorded the vibrations and projected graphic shapes on the screen, colored ripples that corresponded to the frequencies. Dave noticed that the sounds changed with the light of the three suns. In the presence of the aquamarine sun, the melody became higher, more crystalline. When the pearly sun was dominant, the tones descended, like a giant lullaby. And, fascinated, approached a trunk and touched it. The surface was smooth and cold, but not rigid. She felt a subtle elasticity, as if she were touching a living material. Inside transparent, the core emitted pulses of light, at regular intervals, exactly like a biological pulse. They're not just plants, she whispered, they're something else. Maybe they have some form of consciousness. Dave smiled. That would mean that we are in a living choir, and the two of us are unexpected guests. With each minute spent in the forest, the two felt a strange state of mental clarity. The sounds of the forest seemed to cure fatigue, and their breathing became deeper, more uniform. Dave realized that he no longer felt any trace of muscle tension. Kiro analyzed the biological parameters and confirmed. Their heart rate had decreased, and their brain activity was more coherent, almost synchronized with the surrounding sound frequencies. It was as if the singing forest was communicating not only through sound, but directly with their nervous system. In a clearing, they observed an amazing phenomenon. Between the branches, the aquamarine sun's rays were caught and refracted into multiple beams, which moved like ribbons of light. With each touch of a leaf, the ribbon of light transformed into a new musical note. And wide-eyed, said, "It's a huge instrument, and the light is the bow." Dave smiled, but he couldn't take his eyes off the spectacle. It was like a simultaneous visual and auditory symphony, a kind of living spectrum in which you felt part of something infinitely larger. As Kiro scanned, his ultrasonic signal produced a sudden change in the melody of the forest. All the surrounding trees lowered their tones, as if responding to their presence. Dave and looked at each other worriedly. "Did you feel that?" she asked. "Yes, and I don't think it's a coincidence." The nearest leaves began to vibrate at a slower, almost conversational pace. Dave felt an instinctive urge to place his palm on the trunk again. The moment he did, a warm wave passed through his arm, and for a moment, an image appeared in his mind, not clear, but enough. A blue horizon and a tall figure, human, but not from Earth. He pulled his hand away abruptly, breathing hard. I think the tree showed me something." As they went deeper into the forest, the melody became more directed, as if certain parts of the forest were emitting stronger tones to attract them. Kiro confirmed that the sound waves were organized in repetitive patterns, almost like a natural Morse code. And understood first. "I think they're trying to lead us somewhere. Or to test us," Dave added. After almost an hour of walking, they arrived at an open space, a perfectly circular clearing, in the middle of which stood a tree much larger than the others. Its trunk was completely transparent, and in the core you could see a sphere of pure light, pulsating in a constant rhythm. The melody here was different, deeper, with low notes that vibrated directly in the bones. And felt a kind of resonance in her chest, and Dave realized that his heartbeat was synchronizing with the pulse of the central tree. Kiro detected a weak but constant electromagnetic field emanating from that tree. It was obvious that this place was some kind of central node of the forest, perhaps even a control entity. When Anne touched the root of the tree, the feeling of connection became intense. In her mind, an image formed clearer than Dave's, a network of interconnected trees, stretching for hundreds of kilometers, each communicating through light and sound. And there was something else, a vision of beings who looked like people but had translucent skin, walking among the trees and listening to their song. And withdrew her hand, her breath quickening. They're not just trees, they're an entire civilization. And these trees are their living memories. They left the clearing, the melody of the forest changed again, becoming gentler, like a farewell song. Dave and Anne felt accepted, but also given a task, that of moving on and discovering the rest of this world. Kiro emitted a short beep. He had detected organized movement about 2 miles beyond the edge of the forest. It was clear that the first direct contact with the inhabitants of this world was imminent. Dave glanced towards Anne smiled. The forest sang to us and showed us the way. Now it is our turn to follow it. Chapter 14. The Golden Rivers. After they left the singing forest, the melody of the leaves began to fade gradually, until it turned into a vague echo, carried by the gentle breeze of this world. In front of them stretched a wide valley, bathed in a warm, almost liquid light, and stopped suddenly and raised her hand to her eyes, protecting herself from the intensity of the glare. Dave, look. In the distance, a huge river, almost 100 meters wide, flowed slowly. But it was not water as they knew it. Its surface reflected the light of the 3 suns like a liquid mirror, with golden hues, as if instead of water a molten metal was flowing. As they approached, the reflections became hypnotizing. Short, pulsating waves spread in perfect circles, and the colors changed from pure gold to tones of amber, honey and shining copper. Kiro scanned the chemical composition and transmitted the data to Dave's tablet. The result was astonishing. The liquid contained a mixture of minerals unknown on Earth, microscopic suspensions of luminescent crystals and organic compounds. It's not just water. It's a living solution, Dave said. And, fascinated, added, maybe the river isn't just a natural element. Maybe it's part of a larger ecosystem, or even a communication system. When they reached the shore, the ground was covered with fine sand, but not white or yellow, but a dull gold that seemed to absorb light instead of reflecting it. Floating on the surface of the water were plants with semi-crystalline leaves, each with its own glow, like miniature lamps. Anne dipped her hand cautiously. To her surprise, the liquid wasn't hot, as it seemed, but slightly warm, with a silky consistency. Golden particles remained on her skin, slowly disappearing, probably absorbed through the pores. Do you feel that? She asked. Yes, Dave replied, making the same gesture. Tea seems to give you energy. Kiro confirmed a temporary increase in electrical conductivity in their tissues, as if the liquid had transmitted regenerative micro-impulses. It wasn't long before they noticed the first creatures. From the depths of the river, graceful silhouettes rose, resembling translucent fish, but with delicate wings similar to those of a dragonfly. As they swam, their bodies emitted light pulses in tones of blue and green, creating an incredible underwater spectacle. Closer to the shore, creatures that looked like amphibians, but had skin like mother of pearl, lifted their heads out of the water for a few seconds, watching with large, intelligent eyes, before retreating. Dave had the impression that these beings were not only curious, but also aware of the foreign nature of the visitors. Strange phenomenon caught his attention. The flow of the river seemed to follow a pulse. It was not a constant flow, but a succession of gentle waves, as if the entire river was breathing. And immediately remembered the singing forest. And the forest had a rhythm. Do you think they are connected? Possibly. If this liquid circulates through the world network, then the river could be a kind of main artery. Kiro recorded the variations in the flow frequency and detected patterns that resembled a repetitive code. At some point, the surface of the river suddenly rippled, and spherical creatures emerged from the depths, covered with translucent spines that emitted short flashes of white light. These beings floated for a few seconds, then sank again. I don't think they are dangerous, Yet, Dave said cautiously, and laughed lightly. Do you realize? We're on a planet, or whatever it is, and you're already saying, yet. Still, Kiro kept a cautious distance, scanning each apparition and a moment of courage, or perhaps overwhelming curiosity, and pulled out a small container and took a sample of the liquid. The moment the lid closed, the liquid inside changed color, turning to a paler gold. It reacted, she said, amazed. It's as if it knows it's no longer in the river. Dave brought the container closer to Kiro, who analyzed it. The results were impossible to understand by Earth standards. The liquid contained microstructures similar to cells, but capable of emitting coherent light signals. Upstream, they noticed a bizarre structure. Several fallen trunks of translucent trees formed a natural bridge over the river as the light of the three suns passed through the crystal wood. The surface of the bridge lit up, forming a golden bridge. When they stepped on it, the vibrations in the material were so fine that they seemed like a silent melody, felt only through their feet. Kiro again recorded a rhythmic pattern, and Dave began to believe more and more that the entire world was a gigantic network of living communication. Once they reached the other side, they discovered an amazing phenomenon. The river was not quiet everywhere. In a narrower area, the golden water flowed at high speed, creating small waterfalls that projected luminous particles into the air and the pearly sunlight. These particles formed a kind of ephemeral holograms, images that seemed to be scenes from the lives of unknown creatures, and watched fascinated. I think the river tells stories. Every waterfall is a memory. Dave, more skeptical, still felt that he could not contradict what he saw. It was clear that this world had a way of storing and transmitting information through forms that the human mind was only beginning to understand. As the aquamarine sun began to set, the river transformed from gold into a liquid rainbow. Dave and Ann decided to set up a small shelter on the bank to observe the nocturnal changes. As darkness fell, the liquid did not become opaque. On the contrary, it began to shine more intensely, like a string of liquid stars. Underwater creatures danced in their light, and the waterfalls projected images clearer than ever. Kiro at one point detected large shapes moving beneath the surface, too deep to be identified. It was clear that the river hid much more than they could see. Before falling asleep, Ann sat on the bank, watching the luminous waves stretch and recede. Dave, if this river is an artery of the world, then what we find at the source could be the key to the whole place. I know, he replied. And I have a feeling that someone, or something, wants us to get there. And so the decision to follow the river upstream became the next step in their journey. Chapter 15. The Meeting. Morning dawned in a mix of turquoise light, golden rays, and blue shadows as the three suns rose from different angles, blending their colors across the landscape. Dave, Ann, and Kiro had set up camp on the banks of the Golden River. The silence around them seemed different that day, less natural, more watchful, as if unseen eyes were watching them. Kiro, his sensors extended, stopped suddenly and emitted a short beep. A series of thermal shapes appeared on Dave's tablet screen, about 100 meters away, hidden among some crystalline formations. We are not alone, Dave said, his voice low, and didn't seem surprised. I knew this from the moment I saw the first memories in the waterfalls. As they advanced with cautious steps, the shapes began to become distinguishable. They were tall, much taller than humans, with long, thin limbs. Their skin, if it could be called skin, was translucent, revealing a fine system of luminous filaments that pulsed slowly, like a bloodstream of light. They wore no clothes in the human sense of the word, but were covered on their torsos with structures resembling organic crystal plates, which changed color slightly with each movement. Their eyes were large, round, without visible pupils, emanating a soft, almost liquid light. The two groups stopped a few steps from each other. There was no fear in the gazes of those beings, but rather an attentive, almost clinical curiosity. Kiro stood between Dave and Ann, with the sensor light reduced to a minimum, so as not to appear aggressive, and made the first step forward, raising hands with palms outward, a universal gesture of peace. We don't want to hurt you, she said, even though she knew they couldn't understand the words. And yet, the tallest of the beings tilted her head slightly, and the filaments of light in her body had changed their rhythm. Dave had the feeling that they had just received an answer. Kiro began to record the changes in light in their bodies. The pulses were not random, they had a sequence, a code. Within seconds, the robot's algorithms detected a repetitive pattern, a form of communication. Dave took the initiative and, through the interface on the tablet, set Kiro to emit lights in the same rhythm. The first simple message translated from binary language had been, "We are travelers, not enemies." The reaction was immediate. The beings had changed the color of their inner light to a warm tone of green and amber, and one of them took a step forward, and in her long hands she held some kind of crystal. And the moment she touched it to earth, the image of golden rivers projected into the air, the exact river they had spent the night near. The projection was not just a map. As it moved, the images seemed alive. Golden water flowing, underwater creatures dancing, waterfalls displaying memories, and the corner of the image, the source of the river, appeared as an intensely bright area, and from there rose a vertical column of light that seemed to cross the sky, and looked amazed. "It shows us where we need to go." Dave, with an involuntary smile. "Or where they want to take us." Before making any movement, the beings slowly approached Kiro. The robot, understanding that it was under observation, stood still, letting them touch it. One of the creatures pressed lightly on Kiro's head, and the robot began to emit a golden light, not programmed by Dave. "What the hell?" Dave muttered, checking the system. "I think they sent him a direct signal," and said, "Maybe I can teach him to communicate with them." Within minutes, Kiro began to make low, harmonic sounds, accompanied by light pulses synchronized with the beings. It was clear. The robot had become their intermediary. The leader of the group, if he could be called that, raised his long arm and pointed upstream, towards the source. The other members of the group formed a protective semicircle around the people, as if to say, "We will go together," and felt a mixture of fear and excitement. They were the first people to come into direct contact with a civilization on this world. "Dave, do you realize what this means? The history of Earth has never known a moment like this." "I know. But history won't believe us, not why it as they walked." Dave noticed that the beings weren't walking randomly. Each step seemed measured, as if they were following invisible lines in the ground. Kiro detected minute variations in temperature and electromagnetic field just below their path. It was possible that the entire world was crossed by a network of living energy, and these beings instinctively knew how to follow it. One point, one of the group members reached out to and lightly touched her shoulder that moment, and had a strange sensation. A clear image of a luminous forest appeared in her mind, with a huge crystal tower in the middle. "Dave, I think he showed me a place without words." The beings did not communicate only through light. Dave and Ann realized that, through delicate physical contact, they managed to transmit mental images, emotions, and pure sensations. It was not a dialogue in a human sense, but it was a direct sharing of experience. When the leader briefly touched Dave's hand, he suddenly felt a wave of peace and acceptance, as if he had been invited into a family. Towards evening, the group reached an area where the river widened into a natural pool. The golden water seemed to have acquired shades of pink and purple under the light of the triple sunset. The beings sat on the edge, and Kiro, in the middle, continued to emit lights in the same rhythm as them. Dave and Ann, without realizing it, also entered the same breathing rhythm, the same sequence of light and peace. It was their first night under the protection of this mysterious civilization. Before sleep overtook them, and whispered, "We are not just visitors, Dave, we are part of something bigger." He shook her hand and replied, "And I think the journey really begins now." Chapter 16. The City of Light. The journey along the Golden River had continued for 2 days, without Dave, Ann, or Kiro encountering any sign of danger. Instead, each step revealed new forms of life, new colors, and sounds that seemed to have been invented by an artistic mind, not by the randomness of nature. The tall beings guided them patiently, maintaining a speed adapted to humans. A sunset on the 3rd day, the sky lit up in shades of topaz, and on the horizon began to appear what seemed, at first, to be a collection of luminous mountains. As they drew closer, Dave realized that these were not mountains, they were a city. There was no straight line in the constructions before them. Each building, if it could be called that, seemed to have grown organically from the earth, shaped by wind, water, and light, like a giant coral. The walls were translucent, with luminous veins that pulsed slowly, as if they were breathing, and stopped, fascinated. They didn't build the city, they cultivated it. Kiro, analyzing the structure, had sent the data to Dave's tablet. The composition of the walls was a mixture of mineral matter and living, symbiotic tissue, capable of repairing itself. Basically, the city was a giant being, made up of thousands of interconnected organisms. At the entrance, there was no barrier in the classical sense. Instead, two columns of living crystal slowly parted, creating a corridor through which the group walked. When they passed, the columns closed back in place, like two leaves touching. From within came a warm, diffused light that seemed to emanate from every surface. The air was denser, full of suspended luminous particles, like fireflies that never go out. The sounds were delicate, almost musical, vibrations produced by the flow of energy through the city's structure. Dave and discovered that they were not walking along the streets in the usual sense. Beneath their feet were slightly elastic surfaces that moved slowly in the direction of the It was as if the floor itself knew where visitors should go. On the edges, the buildings had sinuous shapes, and inside they could see the silhouettes of the inhabitants. Some stood in circular rooms, others seemed to float in rooms filled with transparent liquid. And observed. The city is not just for living in it. It is a part of their lives. It provides them with energy, protection, and maybe even thoughts. The leader of the group of beings led them into a vast square, where the ground was covered in a living mosaic, which changed colors depending on the steps of those who crossed it. In the middle rose a tall structure, like a huge tree made of liquid crystal. From its trunk, streams of light flowed in all directions, powering the city. Kiro detected a huge energy field coming from this point. The data indicated that the city was fed by a combination of sunlight, or, in this case, triple solar and geothermal energy directed through the roots of this tree. The beings lightly touched their foreheads to its surface, and for a few moments, the luminous filaments in their bodies changed their rhythm. And Dave understood, it was a form of connection to the city network. Without asking for verbal permission, because there was no such code here, and approached the tree and pressed her palms to its surface, a gentle warmth penetrated her body, followed by a wave of images. Flights of translucent creatures over rivers of gold, natural bridges of gigantic crystals, nights under a purple sky full of suns. But there was something else, a clear memory of a world covered in ice, and of a lighted passage, similar to the tunnel they had come through. When Anne broke away, she was breathing quickly. Dave, I think this city knows about our world. As they advanced, more and more inhabitants appeared. There were no identical faces, but they all shared the same inner light, the same slow-breathing rhythm. Some approached and touched Dave and Anne's hands, sending them brief visual impressions. Memories of places in this world, faces of other visitors, probably from distant times. Dave was amazed when he received the image of a man, dressed in the clothes of an explorer from the early 20th century. It was impossible, and yet clear. They were not the first people to set foot here. The beings were not taking them to a proper school, but were exposing them directly to experiences, and a vast whole. The walls presented vivid three-dimensional scenes that moved slowly around them. They were lessons in history and science simultaneously, but not through words or writing, but through pure sensations and images. And felt an entire energetic map of this world being imprinted on her mind. Dave perceived data. Streams as waves of colors and sound vibrations. Kiro, connected to the same network by touching a guiding being, recorded everything. When the three suns began to descend, the entire city entered a kind of natural concert. The walls of the buildings emitted fine, perfectly harmonized musical notes, and the luminous particles in the air danced synchronously with the vibrations. And was moved to tears. Dave. It's as if the city was singing about its own life. Dave, with a lump in his throat. And we are part of this song now. The beings offered them a resting space, a round room, with walls that kept their body temperature, emitting a gentle light. The floor was covered with a soft, living substance that adapted to the shape of their bodies. Kiro stood at the entrance, connected to the city network, but without entering standby mode. There was no threat here. Before falling asleep, and remembered the image of the explorer from the being's memories and whispered, Dave, maybe we didn't come here to be the first. Maybe we came to be the ones who understand. He looked at her and answered slowly, and perhaps to bring back what was needed. The warm light of the city enveloped their faces, and outside, between the three overlapping sunsets, the organic metropolis pulsed slowly, like a giant heart that beat for all its inhabitants, both now and for the two people who had come from beyond the ice. Chapter 17. The Secrets of Civilization. The morning in the City of Light was unlike anything known on Earth. The three suns rose gradually, each with its own hue: turquoise, pale gold, and coral red. Their light mixed in a spectacle of liquid colors, reflected on the translucent surfaces of the living buildings. And Dave had been awakened by a deep, long sound that seemed to come from the very foundation of the city. Kiro, already active, had detected a perfectly repeatable acoustic pattern. "It is a signal, a call," the robot said in its synthetic voice. The guide beings were already waiting for them. Through simple but meaningful gestures, they invited them to follow them. The road led them into an immense structure, larger than any building they had seen before. From the outside, it seemed like a giant overturned tree, with its roots in the air, twisted around a luminous sphere. Entering, they discovered that the walls were made of translucent membranes, and inside, forms of light moved. Slowly, like solidified memories. It was, as they would find out, the living archive, the place where this civilization kept its entire history. Unlike human libraries, the archive did not contain books or digital recordings, but collective memories transmitted directly to the mind of the one who touched the surface of the membranes. The first guide being pressed his forehead to a membrane, and then invited Dave to do the same. When he did, an intense stream of images, sounds, and emotions flooded his mind. They weren't just stories, it was as if he had experienced them personally. He saw a familiar landscape: Antarctica, millions of years ago, devoid of ice, covered in forests and lakes. In this polar paradise lived the ancestors of this civilization. But then, a catastrophic change, a sudden ice age. Instead of migrating, they built underground passages to a vast network of geothermally heated caves, eventually discovering this inner world, bathed in light filtered through layers of crystals. Then the image changed. The first contacts with humans, explorers lost in the last century. In their memories, Dave recognized the figure he had seen in the previous chapter. The stream of memories darkened. Surface image: a group of people bringing with them metal tools, weapons, and strange objects. At first, the exchanges were peaceful, but soon conflicts arose. People were trying to take by force the crystals that powered the city. One of these crystals, a source of colossal energy, had been destroyed, and its lost vibration had almost killed the entire biological network of the metropolis. It was when the council of the civilization decided to completely close all the tunnels and seal the entrances with ice traps. Only the called, those who saw the place in their dreams, could still reach here, because this calling was a kind of natural filter. In the center of the archive, Dave and were led to a higher being, with less translucent forms and a calmer inner light. Like a constant flame, he was the old teacher, one of the last witnesses of the first contact with humans. Through slow gestures and mental projections, he explained to them something crucial. This world was not just a natural refuge, it was a living network that maintained the planet's climatic balance. Its geothermal energy and its crystals, they regulated subtle flows that influenced ocean currents and global temperature. If humans were to extract these crystals en masse, not only would this world die, but the Earth's surface would also enter an irreversible imbalance. The teacher showed them another vision, a rapid succession of images of the three suns of the inner world, partially eclipsing each other. In those rare moments, the energy of the city intensified dozens of times, and a natural portal to the surface opened for several hours, in different places in Antarctica. "This is our connection to you, and our vulnerability," he transmitted, not in words, but directly into their minds. And realized what this meant: if someone on the surface detected these energetic discharges, they could find the entrance without being called through a dream. After the visions ceased, the two engaged people looked at each other without saying anything. They both understood, they now hold a secret that, once released into the world, could attract to this civilization the same greed that had destroyed so many ecosystems on Earth. Kiro, connected to the archive, spoke in his calm voice. "The data is complete. I can encrypt it and keep it inaccessible until you give me permission to reveal it." Dave sighed. "Maybe we should never reveal them." The beings then invited them to what seemed like a ceremony. In a vast room, with the floor covered in glowing liquid, each of them received a tiny fragment of crystal, which the beings integrated into an organic medallion. The teacher told them, "These are not weapons, nor keys. They are connections. They will always remind you that you are part of this place and that this place depends on you." The medallions were warm and pulsed slowly, in sync with the wearer's heartbeat. Before leaving the archive, and dared to ask, mentally, "How many people have come here before us?" The answer came in the form of a disturbing image, 8 human silhouettes, scattered across time, each setting off on unknown paths. Some had never returned. Then the image faded, as if the archive did not want to reveal more. When they left the building, Dave stopped and looked back. The city pulsed quietly, oblivious to his turmoil. He knew that from now on, he and were no longer just explorers, but guardians of a fragile balance. And took his hand. "We promise to keep this place safe. Even if it means lying to the whole world." "Yes, we promise," he replied, and clutched the medallion to his chest. Far away, in the center of the city, the old teacher watched them. He knew that the covenant had been sealed. Chapter 18. What the Ice Hides. The cold seemed different that morning. Dave and Anne, still in the City of Light, felt a cold vibration that came not from the air, but from somewhere above, from the thick layers of ice that covered the entrance to their world. It was like an echo from a place they knew, but from which they had tried to break away. Kira was the first to detect the change. The energy anomaly in the upper layer of ice is increasing by 17%. It's strange. This is not a natural fluctuation. The 3 suns were rising slowly, but the color of the light was mixed with anxiety on the faces of the inhabitants and the city squares. Translucent beings slowed their movements, as if they too perceived an unseen warning. The old teacher called them into the living archive room. Without words, he showed them a sequence of images. Layers of ice in Antarctica, seen from the inside. Then, a red, palpably bright, appeared on the surface. The image expanded and revealed a human research station, one that had not existed in the previous visions. "They are looking for what should not be found," the old man transmitted directly to their minds, and bit her lip. "Does that mean people are detecting your energy?" the old man confirmed with a slow gesture. "For several weeks, their instruments have been receiving echoes. For now, they think it's just a geothermal anomaly. But soon they'll understand that it's not." Dave remembered the maps and satellite data they had analyzed before leaving. There were areas where the ice caps seemed to be thinner, but no one had investigated them much. Now, however, it was clear. These were points of contact between the 2 worlds. Kiro, projecting a 3-dimensional map, indicates 3 such points. The entrance they used, hidden by blizzards and unstable ice. A zone of blue ice, hundreds of kilometers to the east, where anomalous temperatures betrayed the presence of a heat source from within. A fractured glacier, closer to the coast, which could have been used as a temporary natural portal during the alignment of the 3 suns. If the people on the surface reach any of these, and doesn't finish her sentence. The teacher explains a previously hidden truth. The ice covering the entrances is not just a physical barrier, but part of a living system. At the core of each portal are giant crystals, connected to the energy grid of the world below. These crystals regulate heat transfer and pressure, maintaining the stability of the ice. If one of them were to be extracted or destroyed, the balance would be broken. The result? The rapid collapse of a huge portion of the ice cap, followed by the direct exposure of the tunnel. They think they're discovering a deposit of energy or a rare ice formation. "I don't know that they're touching the foundation of an entire world," Dave said, feeling his thoughts grow heavy. That evening, the residents of the City of Light had organized a panoramic projection for their guests. A huge screen of organic light displayed images from both worlds. Above, the frozen, desolate, windswept expanses. Below, the translucent forests, the golden rivers, the sky with 3 suns. T was like an imperfect mirror. What was sterile and cold above was alive and warm below. However, a thin thread of energy connected these 2 extremes, like an umbilical cord of the planet. And looked for a long time and understood. Their world was not just a hideout, but part of the Earth's organism. If humans were to break this cord, both worlds would be affected. Kiro intercepted fragments of weak radio transmissions that had accidentally penetrated the ice structures. They were in English, in hurried human voices. "We confirm unusual geothermal activity. The temperature at depth is rising. We are preparing the drilling equipment." Dave felt his stomach tighten. This meant that the researchers were already several days away from reaching one of the contact points. The teacher looked at them silently, then reached for their medallions. "You were called here for a purpose. Maybe that purpose is not just to discover us, but to protect us and their room." And Dave were talking in whispers. "If we warn the people, we risk attracting even more attention," and said. "If we don't warn them, they will end up here anyway," Dave replied. And then we will have invasion, not contact. Kiro, although he had not been asked directly, intervened. There is a third option. We can interfere with their data from a distance. A falsification of temperatures and pressure could delay the discovery. T was a risky idea, but perhaps the only way to buy time. Before going to bed, Dave had that dream again from the night that had changed everything. Only now, instead of the beauty of the hidden world, he dreamed of an open portal, with people in heavy suits, stepping inside with weapons and noisy devices. Translucent forests were burning, and golden rivers were closing in a dark crust. He woke up sweating, with only one thought: if the ice hides something so precious, people will not stop until they take it. The next morning, Dave and Kiro returned to the living archive. The teacher was waiting for them, along with other members of the council. It was time to decide. Dave took a step forward. We will do everything we can to protect you. But you must help us close the other 2 points of contact. The old man agrees. We will seal the ice. But the connection between the worlds cannot be destroyed. It must only be guarded. By those who understand. And so, for the first time, Dave and fully understood. The ice was not a barrier, but a silent guardian, a guardian that, if removed, would release a secret the world was not ready to know. Chapter 19, Herpy. The Shadow from the Deep. An unknown force threatens the balance of both worlds. As the first rays of the 3 suns caressed the city of light, a dark and abyssal presence began to take shape, one that threatened not only this magnificent world, but also the planet above the ice, the Earth of humans. Dave and Kiro was still in the midst of the tension born of the discovery of the crucial connection between the 2 worlds. But what no one had anticipated was that it was not just the people of New York or the researchers. From the surface they were a threat. That night, when the world beneath Antarctica should have been resting in the gentle light of the 3 suns, everything seemed to have fallen into a strange, oppressive silence. Kiro detected energy fluctuations beyond any usual level. It was not a simple anomaly, but an intense and chaotic vibration, like a pulse unleashed in the depths. The energy is concentrated at the edges of the crystalline organic grid, the robot dog announced, in a mechanical voice, but charged with gravity. This is not a natural fluctuation. He suggests the presence of an unknown energetic entity. And, eyes wide open, looked at the holographic screen that projected the undulating shape of the energy pulse. An entity? What kind of entity? In response, a brief but intense vibration shook the city of light, causing the translucent trees to tremble and the golden rivers to slurp. Over the next few days, news of the energetic disturbance spread like an unseen shadow. The locals, who lived in perfect symbiosis with the city's living nature, began to exhibit restless behavior. Some translucent beings disappeared without a trace, while others seemed to be caught in states of confusion or dizziness, as if their connection to the crystalline grid had been severed. In an emergency meeting of the City of Light Council, the old master said in a grave voice, "It is something old, something that has been buried in the deep layers of the planet. It is a shadow called Herpy, an energy that does not want to be discovered. It has been kept closed by the ice sheets and our network of crystals. If it bursts, it will destroy the balance." And Dave delved into the study of the energy pulse, seeking a scientific explanation for what seemed to be an almost living force. Kiro's discoveries led them to a type of energy that had never been observed on Earth, neither in their artificial intelligence laboratories nor in the satellites that monitored the planet. It was a form of energy that seemed to be the residue of an ancient civilization, perhaps even prehistoric, that had once dominated these lands. But this force was not inert. It manifested itself as an evil shadow trying to regain its freedom, to break the bonds that had kept it closed for millennia. Dave reflected on his original dream, a hidden world, but now he understood that this world was fragile, and the balance between light and shadow could change quickly, with catastrophic effects for both sides. On the other hand, on the surface of the ice, things were not better. A team of researchers gathered in a temporary camp, not knowing exactly what they had discovered, had begun to notice that the rising temperature and geological changes generated by anomalies were endangering the stability of the glaciers. A weak but repeated earthquake had shaken the ground and worried even the most experienced geologists. If the glacier had given way, the hidden portals would have been exposed in a hurry, and the world below would have been contaminated with noise, light, and alien presences. Dave and, following the data transmitted by the satellite via Kiro, realized that the situation was getting out of control. The City of Light began to mobilize. Using the crystalline grid, The inhabitants attempted to stabilize the fluctuating energy, channeling the pooled power to strengthen the energy barriers, ATA. Moment of maximum tension. When the pulse of the shadow seemed to reach a threatening peak, a burst of blue light spread through the translucent forests, and Dave felt an unseen force physically pushing him towards the edge of a crystalline abyss, and ran towards him, and Kiro emitted a warning sound, analyzing the situation with the speed of thought. The energy becomes unstable. It is an energy attack. In those moments, Dave and realized that they were no longer just passive explorers or protectors. They had to become active defenders, armed with the knowledge and technology they had, but also with a deep understanding of the new world. In the midst of the chaos, a telepathic message appeared from one of the wisest beings in the city, a creature with a fluid body and sparkling eyes, named Elian. This herpes shadow is not just a threat to us, it is a warrior from ancient times, a vestige of conflicts before the world was formed. If we do not stop it, it will unleash chaos on your world as well. Elian proposed an alliance, an exchange of knowledge between the two people and the inhabitants of the world under the ice, to understand how this evil energy can be neutralized. In an improvised laboratory, Dave and Elian analyzed the energy of the herpes shadow, trying to create a barrier that would close it again, without destroying the energetic connection between the two worlds. It was an impossible mission, and time was against them. With each passing hour, the energy of the herpes shadow grew, and its vibrations began to weaken the resistance of the ice. This is not just a fight for survival, and said firmly. It is a fight to preserve what life is, regardless of form or world. As they planned their next steps, Dave felt an inner calling, a call to courage and sacrifice. He knew that what was at stake now was much bigger than them. It was the fate of an entire world, but also their world. The herpes shadow in the depths was no longer just a legend or an energetic anomaly. It was a living, conscious force, reaching for the light, determined to break free and change everything in its path. As the three suns slowly descended towards the horizon, the shadow grew even stronger, and Dave and understood that their battle was only beginning. Chapter 20. The Choice. The City of Light had regained, at least on the surface, harmony. The crystalline grid pulsed in a calm rhythm again, the translucent forests sang, and the golden rivers continued their serene flow. But for Dave and every moment of peace was overshadowed by the thought of the decision they had to make. They now knew the truth. Beneath Antarctica there was a living, intelligent world, with an advanced but vulnerable civilization. They knew that between this world and the one on the surface stretched a fragile barrier, both physical, through the ice, and moral, through the promise of silence. The problem was that if they revealed the existence of this world, it could bring help against the shadow from the depths, but also the invasion, exploitation, and destruction of a society that lived in perfect balance with its environment. The old teacher, Elian, and other leaders of the community invited the two betrothed to a meeting in the central hall, an organic cathedral whose walls seemed woven from translucent roots and luminous fibers. You come from a world of noise, speed, and conflict, Elian began, his voice flowing like a warm river. We cannot decide for you, but we can show you the consequences of both choices. On a crystalline surface, holographic images depicted two scenarios. Silence. The surface world never finds out. The civilization beneath the ice continues its existence, but remains alone in the face of the shadow. If the evil energy gets out of control, both worlds will be destroyed anyway. Disclosure. The humans find out the truth. They may send help, but they will almost certainly come with mining, aggressive research, military control, and greed. Dave clenched his fists. So we either leave them alone and risk everything, or we involve them and risk destroying what's here. And looked at Elian. But is there a third way? One where we can warn them without giving them the exact coordinates? Dave felt his mind torn between two loyalties, a scientist and explorer. His duty was to tell the world above. Anything else was a form of concealment of information, something that contradicted the principles of research. But as a man who had just seen the beauty of a unique civilization, he also felt a moral duty to protect it. And if we tell them, do you really think the governments or corporations will honor an agreement? They'll come here with drones, with drills, with satellites, and it'll be over. And if we don't tell them? What if the herpes shadow escapes? Perhaps humans have the resources and technology to shut it down for good. Kiro, the robot dog, interjected with his impeccable logic. There is a 67.3% chance that involving the surface world will accelerate the destruction of the local ecosystem. There is a 54.9% chance that not involving Herpy will result in the release of Herpy within the next 5 years. Both options involve high risk. The next evening, the two of them retreated to a waterfall of golden liquid water. Dave remembered the noise of their city, the sirens, the cold buildings, the hurried people who barely looked up from their phones. He wondered if that world could ever understand the delicacy and sacredness of the place where they were now, and remembered how she had dreamed of the ice gate. It had not been a simple dream, but a call, an invitation. And this call had not been made to an entire world, but to the two of them. Perhaps fate had given them the mission precisely because they could keep this secret, or they could use it wisely on a windless night. Under the light of 3 suns that seemed suspended in the twilight, Dave and Anne met Elian again. "You must choose before sunrise," he said. "Herpy's shadow is moving again. If you leave tomorrow for the tunnel, you will be able to carry a message to your world. If not, you will stay here and be part of our fight." "And if we choose to leave, but not reveal everything?" asked And. Elian looked at them with his sparkling eyes. "This could save both worlds, or it could save neither. There is no perfect answer. Only the answer you can live with." And the stillness before sunrise, Dave and Anne stood on the edge of a translucent cliff, looking out over the city. Everything they had seen here, the singing forests, the golden rivers, the luminous beings, was more beautiful than anything on Earth. Dave broke the silence. "I think we need to fight here, not up there. If we go home and tell the truth, we can't control what happens next." And looked at him for a long time, saying nothing, then nodded. "Then we stay. But we still need to prepare a communication path, in case everything gets out of control." So, they decided, they will not reveal the existence of this place to the whole world. They will stay to fight alongside the civilization under the ice, but they will secretly build an encrypted communication channel to a few trusted people on the surface. Kiro began to modify their equipment so that they could transmit signals to the surface without giving the precise coordinates. Elian gives them coded crystals that could contain huge amounts of data about their world, but which were impossible to decode without the activation key. The Council the Light accepts their choice, but warns them. "You have chosen the harder path. There is no guarantee that you will survive, but there is a chance to save everything." The next morning, when the first sun rises, Dave and Anne knew that their paths with the surface world would cross again, but only if absolutely necessary. For the moment, the choice had been made: silence, protection, and the fight from within. But deep down, the shadow was growing, and time was not their friend. Chapter 21. Betrayal. After choosing to remain in the world beneath the ice, Dave and Anne thought their greatest challenge would be fighting the shadow Herpy. But the first signs of danger came not from the dark depths, but from humans, their own species. A team from the official expedition, remaining in the Antarctic research camp, was waiting for them. Officially, Dave and Anne had temporarily disappeared to investigate a geothermal anomaly detected by Kiro. Unofficially, that absence had raised suspicions. One of their colleagues, Mark Lasker, an ambitious geologist with a thirst for reconnaissance, had begun to notice discrepancies in their reports. Mark was the kind of man who couldn't stand to be left in second place. On the days when Dave and Anne didn't show signs of life through official channels, he had analyzed their GPS coordinates. Something didn't fit. The signals seemed to have suddenly disappeared under the ice cap, exactly in the area where the satellite images were erased by inexplicable interference. When Dave and Anne returned briefly to the surface, under the pretext of bringing additional equipment, Mark greeted them with a cold smile. "You found something interesting down there, didn't you?" Dave tried to keep his tone relaxed. "Just ice and wind, Mark. Maybe a few more unusual formations." But Mark's gaze remained fixed, like a human lie detector. Disbelieving, Mark secretly followed them for the next few days. Kiro, with his sensitive sensors, detected suspicious movements in time, warning them with a discreet signal. Mark Lasker's trajectory overlaps ours in 87% of cases. High probability of intentional surveillance. And felt a shiver. She knew that if Mark discovered the ice gate and the crystal tunnel, the whole secret would be compromised. Single transmission to the surface world and entire waves of people would descend here, military, corporate, government agencies. One evening, when Dave and Anne were underground, checking the stability of the tunnel, Mark managed to follow them on a secondary route. Using a small portable geological sensor, he identified exactly the place where the ice walls were thinner and where the heat from the depths created an atypical thermal flow. When he touched the wall with his hand, a fine vibration passed through his fingers. He knew instantly that he was in front of a major discovery. He didn't go in right away, but he did what he knew best: document. Photos, scans, measurements, all sent through an encrypted communication channel to his contacts in an international mining corporation. Dave and found Mark in front of the entrance, holding an ultraviolet light device that highlighted the outline of the glacial portal. "I knew you were hiding something," Mark burst out. "A new world, isn't it? That's all I need to know to secure my place in history. You have no idea what's out there," and replied, her voice trembling between anger and fear. "It's not a place for exploitation or personal glory. It's fragile. And if people come in without understanding, they'll destroy it." Mark laughed shortly. "The real world doesn't work according to your fairy tales. And if I don't say it, someone else will. I choose to be first." Kiro quickly analyzed the situation and sent an urgent message to Dave. "Mark's data transmission is in progress. Data packet -32% complete. Shutdown window, 18 seconds. Dave understood that he had a choice: either physically stop Mark, risking turning the confrontation into a violent conflict, or find a way to block the transmission without hurting him. With a quick movement, Dave ripped out the antenna from Mark's device, while Kiro activated a jamming field. The signal was cut off, but Mark, furious, pulled out a survival knife. "You won't get away with this secret," he shouted. The fight lasted a few seconds, but it left a heavy air behind. Mark, his gaze full of hatred, threw them a final warning. "You don't have to win. I just have to lose control of the information. And believe me, I'm not the only one who suspected you." With these words, he retreated to the camp, leaving Dave and Anne with a much more serious problem. Even if they had blocked the transmission, Mark had the memory, the images, and enough clues to lead other curious people to the gate. Back in the City of Light, the two told Ilian everything. The old leader did not seem surprised. It was inevitable. Secrets cannot be hidden indefinitely. The question is, will you act to buy time or to openly face the consequences? And clenched her fist. "We need time. The Harpy shadow is still the biggest threat, not humans." Ilian nodded. "Then we need to temporarily move them away from the gate. And that means letting the ice cover it again." Chapter 22. The last day under the three suns. For Dave and Anne, that morning had a weight that not even the three suns of the hidden world could dispel. The turquoise, golden, and reddish light mixed in a gentle dance over the organic city of the underground inhabitants, but the colors seemed more faded in their eyes. It was the last day. The last in which the warm and fragrant air of this world touched their skin. The last in which they left their footsteps on the meadows of light, those living carpets that responded with musical notes to every touch. Kiro, the robot dog, stood almost motionless next to them. In recent days he seemed quieter, as if he too understood what was coming. Although he was an artificial creation, his intelligence allowed him to perceive the emotions of the two and react with unexpected empathy. Ilian, the leader of this hidden civilization, welcomed them in the square central. He wore a white cloak, woven from the fibers of translucent plants that grew only in the light of the three suns. In his hands, he held a small sphere of liquid crystal, but in a solid state, pulsating gently with turquoise light. "This is the gift of memory," he told them, holding out the sphere. "Wherever you look at it, you will see this world. Not just the images, but also the smells, the sounds, the sensations, and you will know that it was not a dream." And received the gift with trembling hands, feeling that in it there was more than memories, perhaps even a fragment of the soul of this world. Before leaving, they wanted to see once again the places that remained in their hearts. They walked through the singing forest, where the crystal leaves changed the tone of their melody with the intensity of the light. Each note felt like a farewell. Then they reached the banks of the golden rivers, whose waters shimmered and changed their reflections according to the movements of the three suns. They touched the warm water, feeling it flow through their fingers like an impossible promise to keep. Finally, they stopped at the foot of the Tower of Light, the living structure that pulsed like a giant heart of the city. There, Ilian and a few of the closest inhabitants prepared a simple feast for them: blue fruits with a honey taste, energizing liquids extracted from the roots of light plants, and organic bread grown from sweet algae. During the meal, the atmosphere was charged with an emotional silence. The inhabitants of this world rarely showed their sadness, but now their gazes were longer, warmer, heavier. Ilian broke the silence. The gate will close again. The ice cycle will cover the entrance for at least 10 years. If you try go back, you will find only impenetrable crystal walls. Use this time wisely. Dave nodded, but his voice trembled. We can't promise that we will be able to protect your secret forever, but we promise that we will not be the ones to betray it. And added, and we promise that if anyone ever tries to hurt you, we will be the first to fight alongside you. Before setting off for the tunnel, they climbed a high hill, the place from which they could see the dance of the 3 sunset suns most clearly. The sky filled with impossible shades, emerald green, hot pink, incandescent orange. The golden rivers reflected the light like living ribbons, and the leaves of the singing forest vibrated in a final symphony. And rested her head on Dave's shoulder, and Kiro sat at their feet. None of them spoken. The words would have seemed too small. When they reached the entrance of the crystalline tunnel, the ice and stones shone in the light within as if they knew this was a solemn moment. The townspeople had led them here in silence, in a kind of procession. Ilian touched their foreheads with his warm hands, leaving a subtle trace of light, a sign of protection. Now leave. And remember, the light here never fades, but it can die in the heart if you don't feed it. The tunnel, traveled for the last time, seemed longer than ever. Its crystals glowed dimly, and each step sounded like a heartbeat. Kiro walked ahead, scanning to make sure no one was following them. As they climbed toward the exit into Antarctica, the air grew colder, harsher, and the turquoise light of the hidden world mixed with the raw white of the ice on the surface. When they emerged from the tunnel, the blizzard hit them with a force that made them pull their clothes tighter around them. After days of gentle warmth and lively light, the cold penetrated their bones like a brutal reminder that their real world was different. Kiro made a short sound, as if he too understood that the magic had been left behind. Dave turned for a moment to the entrance to the tunnel. Already covered by the first layers of ice, he knew that in a few hours there would be no visible trace. In silence, he swore to himself that he would keep the image of the 3 suns alive in his mind, no matter how much time passed, and took out the liquid crystal sphere and looked at it. Instantly in the air, a moving image of the world left behind was projected. The rivers, the forest, the city. It was real, it was there, but inaccessible. They started walking towards the official camp, their steps heavy and their minds full of memories. They didn't know if Mark or someone else was still following them, but they were sure of one thing. This world had to be protected at all costs. We will return, and said, although she knew it could take decades. And when we do, Dave added, we will bring only those who deserve to see it. Kiro, in response, made a short sound, almost a bark, like a final chord to their promise. Chapter 23. Escape through the tunnel. There was no time for farewell ceremonies. In the morning of their departure, Dave and And were awakened by Kiro, who was emitting a rapid succession of sound signals, something he had never done before. The robot dog had detected a sudden change in the electromagnetic field of the area near the gate. Ilian, hurrying into the room where the two were staying, told them bluntly, "The Herpy shadow has awakened. That force from the depths is approaching the tunnel. If you don't leave now, there may be no way back." There was not only concern in his voice, but also a note of cold determination. He was clear that this civilization knew more about the threat than he had told them until then. Dave and Ann gathered their things in a few minutes. No heavy backpacks, just the essentials. The gift of memory sphere, a few plant samples, and water from the river's gold, and their communication equipment. Kiro had already taken the route to the tunnel on his internal map and was calculating in real time the fastest escape route. Ilian and 3 other inhabitants of the world accompanied them to the entrance. In silence, everyone seemed aware that time was running against them. The road through the forest was no longer quiet. The warm air was now crossed by strange vibrations, as if the earth were murmuring a warning. And the crowns of the translucent trees, the leaves no longer sang the same harmonies, but produced dissonant, sharp sounds, like distant cries. Resonance effect. Something massive is moving beneath us, Dave whispered, looking at Kiro's sensors. On the screen, an unstable graph showed irregular, increasingly intense pulsations. As they approached the tunnel gate, the terrain changed. Vegetation disappeared, and the ground was covered with red crystalline formations, impossible to see on their previous visit. Elian explained to them as they walked. When these crystals appear, it means that the herpy shadow is moving close to the surface. It absorbs energy from around it, and uses it to grow. And felt the temperature drop, although they were still in the heart of the warm world. Kiro began to emit a continuous hum, a sign that it was detecting energy anomalies. When they reached the tunnel entrance, Dave and saw what they had never imagined. The blue crystal walls of the corridor were beginning to be covered with black filaments, like living roots. They pulsated and stretched towards the opening. If the roots completely cover the ice portal, the entrance will be blocked forever, Elian said gravely. And they won't just block the way, they'll consume everything you touch. There was no time for hesitation. Dave took the lead, followed by and Kiro, while the three companions stayed behind to slow the spread of the roots. The crystalline corridor was dimly lit, and the vibrations around them were becoming more and more intense. The sounds of their footsteps were accompanied by a dull noise, like a distant sea, but coming from behind them. Kiro, using the auxiliary thrusters, accelerated forward to scan for possible obstacles. Halfway through, the tunnel had been partially collapsed by a wave of solidified ice, probably the effect of the movements caused by the herpy shadow. Dave took a small plasma cutter from his backpack, but it had limited autonomy. "You have 2 minutes, no more," and said, watching him as Kiro monitored the area and the dim light. Black filaments were already beginning to slither through the cracks in the walls, like living snakes. Dave managed to create a passage wide enough for them to pass through, but Kiro refused to move forward until he had scanned the other side. Once he confirmed that the path was clear, they set off again. As they advanced, the air grew colder and their breath came out in steam. The bluish light at the end of the tunnel was now visible, but so were the moving shadows on the walls, long, distorted silhouettes, as if something immense was moving beyond the visible limits, and felt a wave of dizziness and instinctively reached for the sphere of the gift of memory. It pulsed faintly, as if reacting to approaching danger. Elian had told her that the sphere held the essence of the world, theirs, but perhaps it also had a defensive function that they did not yet understand. Less than 50 meters from the exit, the walls of the tunnel began to vibrate violently. Kiro made a shrill sound, a signal of maximum danger. Dave and were now running with all their might, and each step sounded like a blow to the heart. Suddenly, a mass of ice fell from the ceiling of the tunnel, blocking half of the opening. Kiro used a strong impulse of energy from his reserve to partially melt the ice, and the two managed to pass through a narrow space. The cold of Antarctica hit them immediately. The wind howled, raising blinding curtains of snow. Behind them, the entrance to the tunnel was already covered in a thick layer of ice, and the black filaments disappeared beneath it, as if they had never existed. They were breathing heavily, but they were back in their own world. Kiro stood between them, his sensors still active, as if waiting to make sure that danger had not followed them. Standing there with his back to the cutting wind, and realized that they had been minutes away from being trapped forever between worlds. Dave stared at the white expanse before them and told himself that the escape through the tunnel had only been the beginning. The herpy shadow was not a problem solved, only postponed. "We got out. But the war is just beginning," he said, looking out into the distance. And nodded, holding the sphere tightly in her hands. Chapter 24. Keeping the Silence. The return flight from Antarctica was a long and oppressive silence. Dave and sat next to each other, but they exchanged almost no words, and in their minds, the images of the 3 suns, the singing forest and the golden rivers mixed with the black shadows in the tunnel. The memories seemed unreal vivid, but at the same time impossible to share with anyone. The official research team, with which they had set off under the pretext of science, knew nothing of their true mission. Officially, the expedition had been a partial success. The extreme weather and the blizzard had prevented them from collecting all the planned data. Kiro, well hidden in a sealed metal crate, looked like a simple device for measuring magnetic fields. When they landed in New York, a team from the company was waiting for them. The questions began immediately. "Did you find anything interesting under the cap? Are there traces of the previously reported magnetic anomalies?" Dave and were perfectly repeating the official version established on the plane. They had detected local variations, but nothing conclusive. The weather and difficult terrain had not allowed for a complete analysis. The expedition was to be resumed the following year with more resources. It was not a complete lie, but it was far from the truth. On the night of their return, Their Manhattan apartment seemed strangely small after the weeks spent in the vast spaces of the world beyond. The city lights, the sound of cars, the smell of wet asphalt, everything had an artificial touch, as if New York were just a plastic model of a much more alive universe. And stood at the window, looking out at the illuminated bridges, and held the sphere of the gift of memory in her palm. Her inner light was now almost imperceptible, like a sleeping heart. If people knew what was there, she murmured. It would destroy everything in a few months, Dave completed, coming to her side. It must remain a secret. Although no one on the official expedition seemed to suspect anything, Dave and knew that their data, if analyzed in depth, could raise questions. The scans under the ice, which they had stored in the company's servers, clearly showed structures that could not be explained by ordinary geological processes. Over the next few days, Dave invented a data cleaning algorithm that eliminated obvious anomalies, under the pretext of eliminating background noise. Thus, the reports seemed completely banal. Kiro, meanwhile, had been hidden in Dave's personal laboratory in a warehouse on the outskirts of the city. Any unauthorized access was impossible. Keeping quiet did not mean that the danger had disappeared in the nights that followed, and dreamed again of the shadows in the tunnel, only now they seemed to creep among the buildings of New York, leaving patches of darkness behind, in the asphalt. Dave, on the other hand, had dreams of the three suns gradually fading, leaving the sky of the other world in an eternal twilight. He woke up with the clear feeling that the herpy shadow was not limited to a single realm, and that, in some way, it was also connected to their world. 2 weeks after their return, an investigative journalist published an article about the unexplained anomalies detected in Antarctica. The information came from anonymous sources within the expedition. The article was full of speculation about underground structures and possible evidence of a vanished civilization. Although there was no concrete evidence, public attention was growing. Dave and decided to reduce their public appearances and not give interviews. Any wrong statement could trigger a hunt for information that would lead directly to the tunnel gate. On a rainy evening, they both went to the roof of their building. The city shone under the light of the lanterns reflected in the wet asphalt. Dave took out the gift of memory sphere and held it between his palms, between them. "We swear we won't tell anyone," he said. "Not even those we trust." "We swear," Anne replied, touching the sphere with her fingers. Her inner light intensified for a moment, as if approving their decision. Few days after this pact, Dave noticed an unknown man following them from a distance as they left a cafe. He wasn't on their team, but he seemed to know exactly who he was following, and also noticed a white van constantly parked near their building. Maybe it was paranoia, but the feeling that someone was watching them was growing stronger. Kiro, kept hidden, began to issue short warnings when it detected radio signals directed towards the apartment area. Dave suspected that someone was trying to intercept their communications. Friends, colleagues, relatives, everyone felt the change. Dave and no longer accepted invitations, didn't share anything personal, and seemed increasingly withdrawn. In reality, every conversation had become a potential danger. Any slip, any unguarded detail could reveal something of their true adventure. They had found peace only in the laboratory, where they could work with Kiro and secretly analyze the samples they had brought back. But even there, they had the feeling that their time was limited. A month after their return, Dave received an encrypted email from Elian. There was no explanation of how the message had reached their world, but the content was clear. The herpy shadow is not defeated. What you have seen is only the beginning. If someone finds the gate before you, there will be no turning back. The message further strengthened their decision to remain silent. It was not just about protecting that world, but also about avoiding a disaster that could destroy both realms. On a cold winter night, they both stood on the balcony, watching the snowflakes falling over the city. The snow reflected off the buildings, reminding them of the glow of the ice tunnel. And asked him, "Do you think we'll ever return?" Dave replied after a long pause, "Only if we have no choice." And so, they chose to live with their secret, knowing that silence was the only shield between two worlds that were not supposed to meet. Chapter 25. The dreams don't stop. Although they had returned to their seemingly normal life in New York, Dave and Anne quickly discovered that their return was not complete. Each night had become a gateway, one they could not control but that inevitably opened. Dave often dreamed that he was on the banks of the Golden River, watching the sparkling water flow under the three suns. In the distance, black shadows moved slowly, like living clouds, but they did not come closer. Sometimes he heard Elian's voice, calling to him through a warm breeze, "It's not over yet." And on the other hand, had dreams of the singing forest. The translucent leaves vibrated in gentle chords, but the melody was different from their first visit, sadder, more hurried, and the background, a slow drum beat, like a giant heart, beat in an unsettling rhythm. After the first 2 weeks, they realized that their dreams were not just memories, but seemed to convey new information. When they told each other in the morning what they had seen, the images complemented each other perfectly, just as they had before they set out on their first expedition. One night, Dave dreamed of a fragment of a map carved in white stone, showing a network of tunnels beneath the surface of the afterlife at the same time, and dreamed of a clear sequence of luminous symbols engraved on the trunk of a giant tree. When they combined the two visions, the map and the symbols matched, indicating a place called the Double Gate. They didn't know exactly what it was, but they felt that it had a direct connection to Herpy and an alternative path between the worlds. Kiro, the robot dog with artificial intelligence, seemed to react to their stories. Each time Dave described a dream, Kiro's sensors emitted a short sound and the green light in his artificial eyes pulsed faster. Dave connected him to an analysis module experimental dream machine, capable of correlating certain brain frequencies with external stimuli. To their surprise, when Kiro processed the dream descriptions, it generated 3D visual models extremely close to the landscapes they had seen in reality. It was as if the robot had become a passive receptor for the connection between worlds. As the dreams continued, their tone changed. At first they were nostalgic and beautiful, but with each night they seemed to become more urgent, more pressing. And one of them, and saw herself running through the ice tunnel, but it was beginning to collapse around her, the crystal walls shattering like glass under the pressure of a wave of darkness. Dave, in another dream, was in the middle of the City of Light, but the organic buildings were losing their shine, retreating like wounded creatures. The inhabitants were disappearing into the shadows, without making a sound. They both felt that the world beyond was calling them, not just to show them something, but to ask for their help. Although they had not officially discussed a new expedition, each began to prepare in their own way. Dave was working on an improved version of Kiro, equipped with an autonomous power module and the ability to map the underground in real time. And on the other hand, was discreetly gathering survival equipment adapted for extreme conditions. More resistant thermal suits, water filtration systems, nutritional capsules. Neither he said directly, "We're going back," but every gesture they made was a silent confirmation that their departure was inevitable. One February night, Dave's dream became so clear that it seemed real. He was once again on the banks of the Golden River, and Elian stood beside him, dressed in luminous robes. This time, his voice was not a whisper, but a determined tone. "The tunnel is no longer the only way. The Double Gate is close to being opened. If the people of your world find it, neither you nor we will be safe. Turn around." In the morning, when he told Anne about it, she stopped abruptly and said, "Last night I dreamed I was walking between 2 giant pillars of sculpted ice, and beyond that was a horizon with 4 suns, not 3. The symbols he had seen in the dream were identical to those in the previous dreams. Only now they were glowing. It wasn't just the dreams that were driving them to turn back. In recent weeks, Dave had noticed an unusual surge in media and scientific interest in Antarctica. A private exploration company had recently announced a project to drill under the ice for climate research. At the same time, and had discovered in a public government report some coordinates that were very close to the actual location of the tunnel. It was clear that someone somewhere was getting close to the truth. One evening, they were both sitting in the lab, analyzing the data Kiro had collected. The 3D maps of their dreams now formed a complete picture of a region beyond Antarctica, which they had not explored on their first visit. "It's not just about us anymore," Dave said, looking at the image. "If we don't go now, others will get there before us. And then the Double Gate will open without any control," and added. They didn't say, "We're leaving," but in that silence, they both knew the decision was made. Over the next few weeks, Kiro 2 took shape. The new version was more compact, more agile, and had an advanced system. It also had a secret function, an encrypted communication module, capable of transmitting data even through thick layers of ice. Dave hoped that if something happened to them, Kiro 2 could send their exact location. One night, their dreams completely synchronized. They both saw themselves standing on an ice bridge, under which flowing luminous water. From both sides, The inhabitants of the other world watched them silently, holding pulsating crystals in their hands. Above, the three suns were partially eclipsed by shadows, and a common voice, a chorus of thousands of voices, said, "Return before the last song is silent." When they woke up, they needed no further confirmation, and the following days, they began to make discreet reservations for transportation and organize a cover plan similar to the one from the first expedition. Officially, they were to participate in a new polar ice research campaign, sponsored by a climate institute. Unofficially, they were preparing to follow the map in their dreams and find the double gate. The night before they left, they slept little. The dreams came again, but this time they were not warnings. Dave was in a forest bathed in the golden light of sunset, and was floating on a deep blue river. In both dreams, an unknown figure smiled at them and said simply, "The road is clear. You decide what stays and what goes." When they woke up, they felt no fear, but a cold, clear determination, and the morning, before leaving for the airport, they passed a newspaper with the headline, "Major discovery imminent in Antarctica, ice mystery nears solving." Dave smiled bitterly, knowing that if the headline was true, their time was almost up, exhausted. They got into the taxi without looking back. The dreams had not stopped, and perhaps they should not have. They were the sign that the story had not ended, but was just beginning again. Epilogue. New York was as noisy as before. Sirens, horns, neon lights reflected in puddles, people in a hurry who did not know, and probably did not want to know, what was hidden at the edges of the world. Dave and Ann walked the same street that they had crossed countless times, but for them everything seemed changed. They did not talk about what they had experienced. Neither with friends, nor with colleagues, nor among themselves, except rarely, and then in a whisper, as if words might draw attention to them. They knew that the truth would not be believed, and if it had been, it would have brought consequences that they could not control. And yet, silence did not mean oblivion. Every night, the dreams came back. Sometimes, it was the turquoise sunrise over the crystal plains. Sometimes, the translucent leaves of the singing forest, vibrating in a harmony they felt in their bones. And increasingly, the faces of those they had left behind. Kiro, the robot dog, now sat in their workshop, seemingly inactive. But in his electronic memory, all the maps, records, and coordinates of the hidden world were intact. Sometimes, when Dave was working late, he thought he saw a faint light in his sensors, a kind of calling point one evening, and broke the silence. "You know we're going to come back, right?" Dave didn't smile. "I know. The question is, when?" Deep down, they both felt that the gate through the ice was not just a physical passage, but also a fragile thread between two worlds that were not supposed to meet, until something or someone forced the inevitable. Beyond the noise of the city, the turbulent sea and the frozen expanses, in the valley hidden under three suns, the silent civilization continued its existence. Maybe it was waiting for them. Maybe it was watching over them. And maybe one day, dreams will no longer be just memories, but the real call to return. Because some steps, once taken, cannot be taken back.